Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is my show. We are here together dealing with the realities to which we face on a daily basis. You guys can join me. We are going to have a damn good show for you today. Colonel Wilkerson is going to be here at 8 a.m. Colonel Wilkerson was worked with Colin Powell, and I think he was his secretary, if I'm not mistaken. I want to get him right. I don't want to, make him something he's not. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, distinguished professor of government and public policy at the College of William and Mary. Where is it? Right here. He's also probably best known as retired States U.S. Colonel for former Chief of Staff to the United States Secretary State Colin Powell. So he's going to be here at 8 a.m. We also have joining us Mark Frost. Frost is going to join at 9 or 9:15. It's going to be up to him on that one. The Frost thing is great because there's an article that came out in Politico that pointed out that people were right in the last election, that their economic realities were not being seen to. This article is fantastic. Tomorrow I have, what is his name? Professor Wolf is going to join us tomorrow, and he is also going to dig into this. But this is an astonishing piece. Voters were right about the economy. The data was wrong. And what they point out in the piece is that over and over again, as Democrats hyped the economy, they hyped it in a way that gave an impression of the world that wasn't entirely true. And that voters who were complaining about, oh my God, the eggs are so expensive. Oh my God, the chicken wings are so expensive. Those people were right. Those people were right. It is a fantastic piece. And it hits at something that I have been saying over and over again. It's like you guys are talking about these numbers when the reality of it is you're leaving out the most important parts of those numbers. So that is definitely going to be in the mix. Oh, excellent. We have an early one. Good morning, brother. King of Jordan has always, let's move this over because I can't see it. King of Jordan has always been a shill for empire. The threat last week makes him look like a clown. And why are we talking about the King of Jordan? And by the way, Jabari, I haven't forgotten you. Things have just gotten to be a mess in regards to moving and everything else. Once I settle down, I will hit you and we'll get together. But you're right. The King of Jordan sat down with Donald Trump. And I'm not going to hit the story first because I have another story that I really want to hit first. But since you brought it up, Jabari, I am also going to show it because you're right. He looks weak, quisling, as Mark calls him. Because you must understand, neither Jordan nor Egypt wants to take the Palestinians. Neither wants that outcome. Both of them have been very clear that they don't want that outcome. In fact, if you remember, going back to the Biden administration, you had the situation where Joe Biden was like, hey, maybe we can just settle this problem by pushing the Palestinians into Egypt and into Jordan. Is that a good idea, Blinken? Blinken says, yes, that's a good idea. And Biden looks around and everybody tells him, that's a fantastic idea. And when they go to Israel, they say, hey, Israel, what if we just get rid of this problem by expelling all of the Palestinians? And of course, Joe Biden or Israel says, we think that's a fantastic idea. We can ethnically cleanse this area. We can take it all over. And then they go to Jordan and Egypt and they say, kick rocks. We're not doing that. And there are various reasons that they're not doing it. One reason has to do with Hamas and its affiliation and association with the Muslim Brotherhood. And the other has to do with Jordan nearly being overthrown by the Palestinians that were already there. So neither can accept this outcome. And yet it was pressed upon them over and over again. Trump comes in, he looks at the options available, and he comes to the same conclusion. Given my perspective on this, my only outcome is to kill them all or expel expel them from the population. Those are my options. And so Donald Trump comes up with this humanitarian point of view. We're doing it because we care. We're doing it because we care. Ethnic cleansing because we care so much about what happens to the Palestinians, despite the fact that my ally has been killing them in a genocide for the last year. But we care so much, so we need to ethnically remove them from the area. The King of Jordan is sitting here as Donald Trump presses this upon him. This is Trump and the King of Jordan doing everything in his power to not say no, but not say yes.
At least there are many Palestinians, even though you say that everything is going to be beautiful, everything is going to be lovely, they're not going to want to go back. There are going to be people who want to go back and feel like that it is their right to do that. You haven't said, will there be any type of repercussions or anything that happens?
We don't think that's going to happen. We think people are going to be very happy, thrilled. A lot of those people that you're talking about are going to end up maybe living there and maybe working there, but it'll be in a different form. We have had tremendous support for this project, and we think the biggest asset of the project is going to bring peace ultimately to the Middle East.
At least there are many Palestinians, even though you say that everything is going to...
Do you really believe that forcibly removing 1 million, 2 million people is going to bring peace to the region? Do you really believe that? And I guess my catch becomes, how do you do that? And the only way you do that is to march those people by destroying everything behind them. Meaning, if you stay here, you're all going to die. It's going to be that. There is no way to do that short of that. Meaning death being the thing that incentivizes people to move from point A to point B. This idea that we're going to have peace once we get everybody out. Well, yeah, if you remove everyone from a region forcibly, you may create a certain amount of peace in that region after you forcibly remove everybody from the region. I'm trying to get this across, that this is a war crime. By any standard, this is a war crime, what Donald Trump is trying to do. And what he wants the King of Jordan to do, on some level, is impossible for the King of Jordan to do. Now, the catch becomes, okay, well, are there incentives? Does Donald Trump have leverage? And the money that Donald Trump gives to Jordan, or for that matter, gives to Egypt, is going to be the leverage that Donald Trump uses to try to force his way on this issue. But yeah, you're right. The King of Jordan looks silly sitting here. He looks completely silly. I want to bring in another thing, though, before I move to anything else. I literally got dressed last night to do this story because it bothered me to that degree. And I know you can say, well, getting dressed, okay, well, so what? Dude, that is not a small thing. To be up late at night and be like, this story bothers me so much, I'm going to put on my clothes and go do the news. I ended up not doing the news, even though I did get dressed. Bernie Sanders. So, as I pointed out, Tulsi Gabbard has been put up for the Director of National Intelligence. I applaud that. I want that. And the reason I want that is because Tulsi has been a rare bird to be able to come out and say, hey, we're knocking over governments in these regime change wars. This is not a good idea. Maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Maybe we shouldn't put jihadis in control and power of an actual country. And further, I fought for this country. I literally put my life on the line for this country, fighting some of the exact same people that we are backing in these regime change wars. And I applaud that, because you never hear that. Even at the commencement hearing, or at the hearing itself, Tulsi was being pressed by predominantly Democrats on this issue of, hey, why did you talk to Bashar al-Assad? Why did you out the fact that Obama spent $1 billion, if not more, to overthrow the Syrian government? And as she made her case, their issue wasn't that what she was saying was wrong. The issue is that she said it at all. That's astonishing. And me, you get my applause. She said the thing that everybody knew, that nobody would say, that we have been overthrowing governments and we have been causing chaos in the overthrow and undermining of those governments. So yes, when I see Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, I applaud. Democrats, however, did not. And there was this question about whether or not Bernie Sanders would support somebody who supported Bernie Sanders. Remember, Sanders threw his hat in the ring to run for the president of the United States and to go through the Democratic primary to do so. Sanders was running against Hillary Clinton, someone who at the time had absolute control of the Democratic entity. And the reason she had absolute control of the Democratic Party, basically the political entity that was used to run these races, is because all of the money had been drained out through Obama. Obama was running Obama for America in parallel with the Democratic National Committee. And so the money went into Obama's coffers as opposed to the Democrats' coffers. So when Clinton came in, Clinton effectively had people who were in positions who backed her candidacy full tilt. And she herself was effectively keeping it afloat with the money that she was putting into the Democratic National Committee to run the presidential election. She had absolute control over space, matter, and time and what it means to run a Democratic primary. All right. Clinton was seen to be the heir apparent. It's her turn, as they said over and over again. It's her turn. Sanders, initially, if you read the reporting on it, Clinton had no issue with Sanders running. In fact, she liked the fact in the beginning that Sanders was running because from her point of view, I can beat him, not just beat him, I can show I have an opponent, and in having an opponent, I would run this race, I'd win this, and then I win the presidency. Everything is great. And then Sanders started winning states. When he started winning states, all of the friendliness went away. And not just the friendliness, it became a serious and legitimate contest in a way that she had never anticipated. Sanders, at that point, was running against the Democratic machine, and that Democratic machine had identified Sanders as an enemy. And anybody that would work with Sanders was also an enemy. So you could imagine the chaos, the outright anger when Tulsi Gabbard came out and backed Sanders. And not just backed Sanders, stepped down in her position to do so, pointing out that there are severe problems in this country and in the party itself, and that things needed to change, and that she was backing one Bernie Sanders.
I'm required to stay neutral in Democratic primaries, but I cannot remain neutral any longer. The stakes are just too high. That's why today I'm endorsing Senator Bernie Sanders to be our next president and commander-in-chief of the United States. We need a commander-in-chief who has foresight, who exercises good judgment, and who understands the need for a robust foreign policy which defends the safety and security of the American people, and who will not waste precious lives and money on interventionist wars of regime change. Such counterproductive wars undermine our national security and economic prosperity. As these elections continue across the country, the American people are faced with a very clear choice. We can elect a president who will lead us into more interventionist wars of regime change, or we can elect a president who will usher in a new era of peace and prosperity. It's with this clear choice in mind that I'm resigning as vice chair of the DNC so that I can strongly support Bernie Sanders as the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. And now I ask you, stand with me and support Bernie Sanders.
She took on risk, real, legitimate risk. You don't do that without risk. There was no way to believe that Bernie Sanders was going to be able to beat Hillary Clinton. They did so with this idea that this is a risk. I'm going to back this guy. I'm going to back this guy because it's in my best interest and the country's best interest to do so. That's what Gabbard did when she did this. Gabbard was a rising star in the Democratic Party. Gabbard had all the love and the accolades coming in her direction, and she would most likely have a career for the foreseeable future in the Democratic Party, whether they won or whether they lost, if she indeed remained a good soldier and stuck by Clinton like all the other Democrats had decided to do so. Tulsi didn't do this lightly. That's what I'm trying to nail down. I'm trying to get across this notion that Tulsi stood by Sanders when all of these other Democrats effectively abandoned that same Bernie Sanders. And yet, when it came down to it, when the vote for the Director of National Intelligence came up, Sanders voted against Tulsi Gabbard. She stuck her neck out for Bernie Sanders when he needed a friend, when he needed somebody to stand with him, shoulder to shoulder, to go against the Democratic machine. Tulsi Gabbard was there to do so. She was there to do so. When Tulsi needed Sanders, he was not. He was not. And voted against somebody who backed him as he ran for president of the United States. People who I know went looking, and by the way, when all of this talk about Tulsi Gabbard and these attacks were leveled at Tulsi Gabbard, Sanders came out and said this. Sanders press release, Representative Tulsi Gabbard endorses Bernie Sanders. U.S. Bernie Sanders on Sunday welcomed an endorsement by U.S. Representative Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, who resigned her Democratic National Committee leadership post in order to back Sanders for president. Right here. Quote, Congresswoman Gabbard is one of the most important voices of a new generation of leaders, Sanders said. As a veteran of the Iraq War, she understands the cost of war and is fighting to create a foreign policy that not only protects America, but keeps us out of perpetual wars that we shouldn't be in. This is what he had to say about her. So, when asked, this woman has her pulse on what America wants in regards to foreign policy, for us not to be engaged in these regime change wars. That's what he had to say. When it came down to the vote for Director of National Intelligence, however, no, not so much. That's astonishing. That's weak. That's pathetic. That's sad. Bernie Sanders, I went looking and I found his balls. Here they are. Here they are. Sanders' balls. Right here at the DNC. If I could pull this up. There we are. Sanders' balls right at the DNC. Right at the DNC. Bernie Sanders. There's his testicles. We found them. We found them. They are no longer attached to his body. They can't be. Because you can't make a vote like that and undercut, put a knife in somebody who literally stood there arm in arm when the entire machinery of the Democratic National Committee was being brought down on that same Bernie Sanders. That is astonishing. It is weak, feckless, and I'm saying this as somebody who's been an advocate of Sanders. This is disheartening, to put it mildly. The idea that you don't stand beside people who stood beside you at a time when you needed it. And put this in context. Think of Elizabeth Warren, where Bernie Sanders was like, yeah, Elizabeth Warren and I are on the same page. And the first opportunity that Elizabeth Warren got, she put a knife in him. Over and over again, she put a knife in him. And yet, the people who stood by him, he can't seem to muster up the courage to stand beside them as they are trying to do good things for the country. Even if you don't like Trump, when you want somebody in Trump's ear that Trump actually listens to, that may affect him in some way on some issue, meaning even if Sanders didn't like Trump, which I get he doesn't, why wouldn't you want the person who you thought was a great person to back you, to stomp with you as you was running for president, in his ear? Do you honestly believe that Tulsi Gabbard, the same Tulsi Gabbard that you chose to be your commander of sorts, do you really believe that that person is so radically changed in their framing and point of view of the world that because they're by Trump, they're going to tell him something different than what they would have told you? What I'm trying to get at is there are things that go beyond this individual political back and forth. And some of those things go into what is best. What is a better outcome? What is something that is in the best interest of America? You clearly saw something in Gabbard. Otherwise, you wouldn't have chose her to back you. You wouldn't have had this person on your team if you didn't see something in that person that you loved, like, or at the very least believe would have been productive for your campaign and for America as a whole. And just because that person was drummed out of the Democratic Party for backing you, no less, when it now comes up where she needs, or at the very least, would like your support, you can't muster up the courage to give it. That says a lot about Sanders. It does. I know people love the guy. Fair enough. This is nothing about Sanders' priorities in regards to his political wants. All of those things are particularly fine. This is more to go with this idea of backbone, of spine, of courage. And I don't even know why it would take courage to back somebody who backed you and ended their career in the Democratic Party to back you. Why do you think that she is somehow different than the person who you chose to work with when you were running for your campaign? Why do you think that? Why do you not see the positive benefit of having somebody who is backing you to be in Trump's ear on issues of foreign policy, or for that matter, policy in general? Even if Tulsi doesn't get her way, it is still a positive outcome that she is in the ear of the President of the United States. This is one of the weakest, most pathetic shows that Sanders has come up with out of a list of weak and pathetic outcomes that Sanders has been involved in. This is one of the worst. This is frankly one of the worst. It should have been an easy vote to back Tulsi. I don't care what any other Democrat might thought. It should have been an easy vote to back Tulsi. It's not backing Trump, to make that clear. The same Bernie Sanders voted for Marco Rubio, and yet couldn't bring himself to back Tulsi Gabbard, a person who put their career on fire to back Bernie Sanders. Bad show, bad look, bad outcome, bad vote, bad a lot of things. And all of those things are directly related to Sanders and what he is, or for that matter, what he is not. And when somebody made this point of saying Sanders equals Trump, no, Trump would have voted for Tulsi in a heartbeat. Because in Trump's mind, it would have been an issue of loyalty. She stood by me. I'm going to stand by her. I don't give an F what these other people say. She stood by me. She stepped down to back me. She set her career on fire to back me. And so, yeah, I don't care what happens. She has my support. That's what Trump would have done. That's what a decent person would have done. That's what anybody would have done that had even the inkling of loyalty that Sanders, for whatever particular reason, under no circumstance, could have mustered. This is a horrible outcome. This is a horrible vote. And whatever this is, it means something. And I guess the catch is you can make up and come to your own conclusions about what it means. Weak, feeble, and inauthentic, an inability to even understand what the concept of loyalty means. All of that comes into play with that vote. Yeah, I don't want to beat it into the ground, but I'm just saying, horrible outcome. Yeah, she is still going to be confirmed. That's not the issue. The issue is that she was willing to put her career, set it on fire, in order to back Bernie Sanders, believing that Sanders was better as commander-in-chief, and for that matter, better from the standpoint of her own political priorities. Meaning, oftentimes, politicians are put in a position where there's a question that's being put to them. What is more important to you? Is your political career more important? Or is doing what's best for America more important? Most politicians obviously are going to go in the direction of what is in my best interest. And hopefully the things that are in my best interest will coincide with what's in the country's interest. And we can kind of, find a middle ground in those things. Meaning they're looking out for themselves first. Gabbard took a risk on Sanders because it was in the best interest of America. At the very least, she thought, for Sanders to be commander-in-chief as opposed to a Hillary Clinton. He did what's best for America. Sanders did what's best for himself. Sanders, in taking this vote, lumped in with a bunch of loser Democrats and couldn't find the courage, couldn't find the charisma, couldn't find the basic humanity, couldn't even find this thing of just basic, decent loyalty to say, she backed me, I'm going to back her. He couldn't do it. He could do it. It just wasn't in him as a person to muster up the most mustard seed of loyalty to back the person who backed him. He's lost my respect to an insane degree with a vote like this. And I get it, man. Anybody who wants to back Sanders on this, fair enough. God bless you. I'm just pointing out this is weak. This is weak on steroids. And yeah, I'm not going to beat it in the ground. I'm just saying the weakness of Bernie Sanders is getting to the point where it can't shock me anymore. This is one of the weakest things that I've ever seen in my life that a politician did. I thought Joe Biden was weak and incompetent. Sanders, on this vote, took the cake. If you can't back somebody who's willing to back you, what does it say about you? And why should anybody in the progressive movement or anything else back you when you can't turn around, I would imagine, under some level of pressure and back them also? If you can't back your allies, who can you back? And why should those allies be allies at all to you when it's clear as day that when the situation presents, you won't have their back? Horrible look, Sanders. Horrible look. Bernie, the betrayer. To the Bernie, what is that? Bernie, the betrayer? E2 Bernie, yeah, A2 Bernie. A2 Bernie. Thank you, President Jafar. A2 Bernie. Just outrageous. I mean, the woman, look, right here. Look at this. Here's another one. Tulsi Gabbard comes out backing Sanders.
Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii.
My fellow Democrats, my fellow Americans, aloha. You know, people have asked me how a somewhat frumpy and maybe even sometimes grumpy 70-year-old guy could become the voice for millions. Connecting seamlessly with laborers from the Rust Belt and environmentalists from the West. The answer lies in his aloha, in his deep love for others and our Mother Earth. As Bernie has said, the truth is, when you hurt, when your children hurt, I hurt. When my kids hurt, you hurt. This, my friends, is a movement of love. Love which calls upon us to care for families torn apart.
God, man, that is so brutal. Ah! This is a movement of love. This is a movement of love. This brings back memories. I remember, you must understand, for me, Sanders was my awakening of sorts. Sanders was the guy that made me realize, whoa, wait a minute, it's economics. It's the issue. It's lefty populism on the economic side that matters. It's the thing that touches each and every one of us. We're all connected. in this way. And being connected in this way, we can make movements, changes to our system, to the way that we operate in this country. We don't have to be this way. The Democratic Party doesn't have to be this way. It was that. And when you were at one of these concerts, and I'll call it a concert, all of these other people who were right there with you, you may all have differences. That guy might be white, black, gay, straight, whatever. But all of you are on the same page on this kind of economic change that needs to be made in moving forward. The thing that Sanders called a political revolution. Gabbard was one of his lieutenants. So much so, she came out and gave a speech. The nomination speech for one Bernie Sanders. For one Bernie Sanders. The same Bernie Sanders that voted no on that same Tulsi Gabbard. I'm trying to get across that this wasn't rando person that decided to back. It wasn't that. She torched her career to do it. And she was close to Sanders in that presidential run. So close that she's on stage giving this speech. So yeah, it's mind-blowing that somebody who's willing to do that for him and for America, he can't back her. He couldn't find the courage to back her when she could find the courage to back him. This is a betrayal. A betrayal is an understatement. This is horrendous. It is weak. And Sanders, who marshaled tens of millions of dollars from people for this notion of a political revolution. Well, what does a political revolution require? Courage, loyalty, fealty. This idea that you're working with all of these people and you have their back in the same way that they had yours. And when it boils down to it, Sanders did not have their back, or at the very least, didn't have Gabbard's. I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to beat it into the ground. It's just outrageous. It's just outrageous. One of the other things that, what is this? Genocide supporters in the mind, praise of genocide supporters. Yeah, again, Sanders, problematic right here. What is this? Scrappy Noopers. Jamal, was it weakness from Sanders or was it planned from the beginning? No, weakness. It's weakness. It's weakness. Betrayal and weakness. It's those two things. I don't think Sanders planned it because nobody knew that Tulsi Gabbard was going to get the Director of National Intelligence nod. Meaning there was nothing in the mix. If you look back years ago, they say that Gabbard, even when Trump was, let's say, riding high in the polls or whatever, was going to get the nod for Trump for the Director of National Intelligence. That's something we just found out. So this vote that came up on it wasn't planned. And at the very least, Sanders may be working with Democrats and voting no. Fair enough. But I'm saying that's irrelevant. She backed you. You should back her. It shouldn't be a question. It shouldn't be, oh, what do I do in this moment? She torched her career to back you. You should be willing, in the position to which you find yourself as Bernie Sanders and as in that Senate position, that Senate seat, to be able to say, she backed me, I'm backing her. Full stop. Nothing else to say. No further discussion necessary. She backed me when it was difficult for her to do so. I'm backing her. I'm saying, what does it mean when that level of loyalty is not reciprocated? What does it mean when you can't muster up enough loyalty and courage? And I don't even need understand why courage is necessary, but why you couldn't muster up enough of whatever it is to say, she backed me, I'm backing her. It's simplistic to me that loyalty on that level is straightforward. It's simplistic. Sanders, who wanted all of these people to back him in a political revolution, couldn't find it in himself to back somebody who backed him. That is disturbing. That is betrayal. And that is Bernie Sanders. And I'll end it on that. Yeah, I ended on that. Right here. Thomas, come on, right here. Thomas, you made a few mistakes. I hope you learned from your lesson. Oh God, when you get to the next gig and save your money, you shouldn't have went on all of those vacations when you work for Sputnik. Why not? It's a paycheck. Take a paycheck like any other paycheck. It was a job. I don't understand the lesson learned in that. But fair enough. What's the other one? Beating it to the ground. You beat it to China already. Addresses support for the genocide. Look, you will not have me defending Tulsi Gabbard's everything that she does. That is not where I am. And with any political candidate, especially working in the Trump administration or anything else, they're going to have things that I'm going to find egregious. That is also going to be true. But if you're asking me on this notion of, okay, well, among all of the people who were running and in contention, and for all of the things that these people stood for, Tulsi was one of the rare, let's say, gems in that was willing, in the least, or at the very least, on the issue of, let's say, Syria being a really good example, to buck the trend of policy that went into overthrowing governments. I've never seen that. Not in a political space, and certainly not somebody who's being put for the director of national intelligence. Everybody in our political space backed that genocide and is currently backing that genocide on the Democratic side and on the Republican side. So this idea that backing Tulsi Gabbard is somehow backing the genocide is nonsense. I back Tulsi Gabbard because Tulsi Gabbard is willing to call a spade on this issue of regime change wars in a way that no other candidate was. It's that. So, no, I'm not on this mindset of backing her on everything. Obviously, there are going to be things that she does that I don't particularly like. As I've told you before, I don't have a dog in this hunt politically. Are there people that are like for various positions? Yes. RFK Jr. being one. And if you remember, when RFK Jr. decided to do this flip to, I'm an anti-war candidate, but I believe in genocide. Okay, well, that's nonsense. In which case, he lost my support overnight. For president, for his position in the food safety, yes, he has my support. Him having a point of view of genocide has nothing to do with whatever he does in the food safety area, or for that matter, dealing with corporations who hate him being in that position. That'll become my point. I have support for these people in the roles to which they're being put in, because for the roles they're being put in is directly related to the reason why I like those people in those roles. I want somebody like Gabbard in Trump's ear saying, hey, they're lying. Maybe we shouldn't do this. As opposed to having somebody else who will be more full-throated on this idea of intervention in other countries. It's that part. So yeah, in the position of Director of National Intelligence, yes, I support Tulsi in that. Very straightforward. Very straightforward. Scrappy Noopers, Bernie is Judas. Yes, I think he is. I think he is. That's my take on that issue. I want to go to another one. And my mom and I are going to agree on this one. I am not against Scott Jennings under normal circumstances. He says things that are, of course, going to back the Trump administration. But he also says things sometimes that are true, that get ignored. This is not one of those instances. He is talking out of his ass in this clip. And I want to play this clip, and I want to kind of get to the heart of the issue. There was a fight on CNN on this issue of ethnic cleansing by Donald Trump. So as we showed this video, I showed this clip before, but I'm going to show this clip one more time. And this was Trump himself sitting with the King of Jordan. And in this clip, Trump, if I have the clip, at least I thought I had the clip. He's sitting with the King of Jordan, and he's effectively talking about ethnic cleansing right here. He's talking about ethnic cleansing and how the area is going to be great and everything else. I'll play it one more time.
It's going to be beautiful. Everything is going to be lovely. They're not going to want to go back. There are going to be people who want to go back and feel like that it is their right to do that. You haven't said, will there be any type of repercussions or anything that happens?
We don't think that's going to happen. We think people are going to be very happy, thrilled. A lot of those people that you're talking about are going to end up maybe living there and maybe working there, but it'll be in a different form. We have had tremendous support for this project, and we think the biggest asset of the project. It's going to bring peace ultimately to the Middle East.
Middle East. There are many
Yeah, a couple things. Number one, the reason we're here with this hostage situation this weekend is because Hamas decided to stop participating in the deal that was brokered as Donald Trump was
That's
coming
not
into
accurate.
office.
Actually, the Israeli newspapers today says that Israel violated the ceasefire.
So I know what your position is. I know what your position to believe Hamas and not Israel. I know that's
my
what you
position.
believe.
It's the Israeli newspaper and the New York Times and Israeli politician.
But our ally is Israel, and you can't trust
But
Hamas any
but
farther
our
than you can
allies
follow.
violated the
reason we're here-
ceasefire.
And who
They
started
killed
it in the beginning?
100
Who started it in the first place?
Israel violated the ceasefire, killed
We're here
100
we're here
Palestinians
because
during
Hamas
the
kidnapped,
ceasefire.
raped, and murdered. Yeah, a couple things. Number one, the reason we're here with this hostage situation.
Jennings is wrong. He's wrong on so many levels. And there was another clip where he's talking about, well, I was getting this out of the New York Times. Okay, well, let's look at the New York Times. New York Times, right here, very clear, unequivocal. Mr. Trump has repeatedly called for the United States to occupy and rebuild Gaza, threatening on Monday to withdraw financial support for Egypt and Jordan if they do not house Palestinians displaced by that effort. If you go down a little bit, the current standoff stems partly from Hamas's accusation that Israel has not upheld its promises for the first phase of the ceasefire. Israel was required to send hundreds of thousands of tents into Gaza, a promise Hamas says Israel has not kept. Speaking on condition of anonymity to discuss a sensitive matter, 3 Israeli officials and 2 mediators said Hamas's claims were accurate. Israel has not fulfilled the obligations of the ceasefire agreement. So Jennings is talking out of his ass. It's not that Hamas wasn't living up to the terms. They are. It's Israel who's breaking those ceasefire agreements every bit as much as they did in Lebanon. Now, add to that, if you are Hamas and you're looking at all of this, and what you hear is we are going to forcibly displace and ethnically cleanse Gaza. We are going to get 2 million people out to leave, forcibly leave. And you are sitting here like, well, wait a minute, we had a ceasefire agreement. And while you're telling me that we have a ceasefire agreement, you are also simultaneously saying, as we attend and maintain to the agreement, meaning we're sticking to this agreement. And as we're sticking to this agreement, you are in every media report, every camera that is put into your face, every mic that's put into your face, your response is, well, we are going to ethnically cleanse the area. What is your response as Hamas in this? You're sticking to the agreement. The other side is not. And not just not, they are making plans to remove you from your home that you've been there forever. How are you to take this? Are you really sticking to the agreement as Israel if the plan is to forcibly and ethnically expel over 1 million people? It's that. Jennings is sitting here trying to defend this nonsense with this clip and is asking this woman, well, how did it start? It started because Israel has been occupying and expanding and taking over territory and has been doing so for decades, with the U.S. understanding and backing them as they do so. And in this particular moment, they believe that they have a moment where they can change the context of the situation on the ground because they have a U.S. president that is completely obsequious to Israel. That is their thought. That is their belief. That is what they're going to try to accomplish. So this idea that Hamas is not sticking to the agreement of the ceasefire is nonsense. Even Israelis, papers point out that Hamas is. The issue is that Israel doesn't believe it needs to stick to the tenet of the ceasefire agreement because they've never stuck to the ceasefire agreements. This is Noam Chomsky. Chomsky talks about this in a historical context. Right here. And what he's saying is effectively what is happening now. It is exactly what they're doing.
They do, but they've been doing not much. What they've been doing is what I described. Starting in November 2005, an agreement was reached between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, then not Hamas. Israel completely rejected it, and Hamas lived up to it, not a single rocket. Then came the January election, and Israel intensified its attack with U.S. support. After that, there are repeated attacks, Israeli attacks, and ceasefires agreements. Every ceasefire agreement is approximately like what I read. What happens is Israel completely dismisses and disregards it, maintains the siege in violation of the ceasefire, increases the violence. Hamas lives up to it, and Israel officially accepts that agrees to that, until some escalation of Israeli violence leads to a Hamas reaction, and then another episode of mowing the lawn. That's been going on since November 2005. Hamas is not a nice organization. They do a lot of rotten things. That's for the Palestinians to worry about. But it has nothing to do with us. If we were supporting Hamas, nothing, zero. If we were supporting Hamas, it would be our problem. But we're not. And what they do is for Palestinians to deal with. What we deal with is what we are doing, which is supporting massive criminal operations all over the region, blocking peace. That's for us to be concerned about. Those who are supporting Hamas can worry about Hamas. Hamas are not my.
I hope you notice that what he pointed out, he used Palestinian Authority. And part of the reason that he used Palestinian Authority, or that I'm going to point out Palestinian Authority, because at one point Israel called them terrorists. They also looked at the Palestinian Liberation Organization as a terrorist organization in the same way they look at Hamas as a terrorist organization. I'm pointing out that this plan of, sure, we'll accept a ceasefire, but no, we're not really going to live up to the terms of the ceasefire. It's not something new. It's, at this point, policy. Jennings is wrong. And again, if you're a member of Hamas, or if you're a member of Palestine, one of the Palestinians in Gaza, what you are hearing and what you are seeing is we are living up to the terms of a ceasefire. They are planning to expel all of us, millions, from our region. So how are they living up to the terms of the ceasefire when you are actively and engaged in a plan to expel 1 million people? How is that living up to the terms of anything? So Jennings, I have no idea what Jennings is talking about. Either you live up to the terms of the ceasefire or you don't. And in this case, Hamas's point is, well, wait a minute. We're releasing these hostages. We're expecting certain things in return, and we're not getting the things in return from the release of the hostages. And then you get Donald Trump coming out and say, all hell is going to break loose if you don't continue with releasing hostages for nothing in return for the release of those hostages. It's that. You're not attending to the agreement, is the point. And this idea that these guys are effectively making, or that Jennings is trying to defend here, effectively saying, no, I'm basing this on the New York Times. Well, again, as I point out, the New York Times, very clear. Speaking on condition of anonymity to discuss a sensitive matter, 3 Israeli officials and 2 mediators said Hamas claims were accurate. I have no idea what Jennings is talking about. But I want to get to my guest. He so graciously decided to join me, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. I want to give him a good intro for his bio. Right here, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson is Distinguished Visiting Professor of Government and Public Policy at the College of William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. He also taught for 6 years at the University Honors Program at the George Washington University School in Washington, D.C. He is also, and probably best known as, retired United States Army Colonel and former Chief of Staff to the United States Secretary of State Colin Powell. Professor, Colonel, welcome to the show, my man. How are you doing today this morning?
Well, excuse me, I've been shoveling snow for about an hour and a half, so I'm a little worn out.
Have you? Have you? Yeah, it's a wintry
We were
day.
supposed to get 3 to 4. We got about 8.
Really? So are you still in Washington, D.C.?
Just outside in Falls Church, Virginia.
Okay. So you're not that far away from me. We're about an hour and 15 minutes, give or take away. Thank you for joining me, man. I really do appreciate it. I always appreciate these visits. I need to start in Ukraine. So Zelensky has given an interview with The Guardian, and they've talked about all of these issues associated with Ukraine and everything else. And one of the things that has come up is this thing of land exchange. He effectively pointed out, well, hey, we'll give up territory. We'll exchange land. So we will give them parts of Kursk that we have taken, and they can give us some unspecified territory that we haven't necessarily defined yet that is going to be up for exchange. Now, Maria Zakharova has pointed out, effectively says something to the effect of, those soldiers that are in Kursk will be given land, and that land will be a grave. I'm paraphrasing. They will be buried. We're not exchanging anything in the context of any kind of land deal. We're going to win this war. It is going to be done by facts on the ground. That's what's going to decide this conflict. Donald Trump, in one of his statements, gave this kind of vague reference where he says, right here, the U.S. has spent hundreds of billions of dollars on Ukraine in recent years. Quote, they may make a deal. They may not make a deal. They may be Russian someday. They may not be Russian someday. But we're going to have all this money in there. And I said I want it back. Okay, I would imagine that if you're Zelensky, what you don't want to hear is, hey, these people may be Russian someday. That is not the thing that you want the president of the United States to say on any circumstances. Give me your take on where we are today with what you hear coming out of Donald Trump on this issue of Ukraine. I am super curious on your framing of the new norm that is into effect with Donald Trump being in office.
I think what we're looking at increasingly, and I think what we looked at in his first term, very discombobulated because there were many, many people around him at that time, H.R. McMaster, James Mattis, and a host of others, who actually had a foot in the national security complex, if you will, of the United States, of the empire. So he had all these people, even though he often wouldn't listen to them, he nonetheless had them bouncing reasonably sane ideas, sane within the concept of maintaining the empire, off his head all the time. He no longer has that. He has people all around him who are principally now the Zionists, whom he is so beholden to, like Miriam Adelson and others, hurling thunderbolts at him all the time about this, that, and the other thing, but prominently about Gaza, of course, and secondarily about Ukraine. And he has an 80-year-old, I'm 80 years old now, so I can say this, general who's his special envoy to that place. And he has an absolute unconscionable tyrant leading Ukraine in Volodymyr Zelensky, who is growing more and more frantic every day that goes by. So anything you hear coming out of Donald Trump has to be couched in these terms. He's not an ignorant man, except he's an ignorant man. He's a smart man, but he's ignorant. Ignorant meaning lacking the knowledge of what he's talking about. So in terms of national security issues, he is purely ignorant. He has no idea what he's talking about. So whatever last word reaches him, now primarily from the Zionists and ultra-Zionists, is what he's going to pronounce. Look at what he said the other day about the United States buying Gaza. The United States can't buy Gaza.
Right.
Gaza's owned by Israel. Every lock, stock, and barrel of that territory is owned by the national security complex of Israel. Even Israeli citizens don't own their land. They lease it from the security complex. Everything in Israel virtually is owned by the security complex, even those so-called billionaires and complexes and things that we've underwritten to come up and be predatory capitalists just like us. It's ultimately owned by the national security state called Israel. So he doesn't know any of these things, Jamal. He knows none of this. He just shoots from the hip all the time based on his own concept of how to do deals. And that's causing him enormous problems right now. Problems with Netanyahu, problems with Zelensky, and maximal problems with Vladimir Putin, who, to get to your point of your question, is not going to give him an inch. Not an inch.
Well, that's effectively
they
what
own
they
the
said.
territory. They own the territory they occupy. They are going to own that territory. There's no way Zelensky or Trump or anyone else is going to get that territory back, short of a full-scale NATO conflict with Russia. And none of us want that. I don't even think Donald Trump would be ignorant enough to want that. So we're at an impasse right now, an impasse that could last for months and months, even years, unless Trump breaks through this juggernaut of bad advice he's getting and bad advice coming from Zelensky as well. Unless he breaks through that, we're going to have a stalemated war that's going to kill more and more people.
You know, the last time that we spoke, you pointed out that you could make a deal. That if Trump decided to put you in the position to have conversations with Putin, Zelensky, or whoever in those conversations, that there were things that could be exchanged to make this issue of the Ukraine war, if not go away. Well, yeah, go away. I'll use that term. To end the war, to end the conflict itself. What would it be? What would you exchange? Like, what would be that conversation that you would have that you think would be, let's say, a middle ground that would allow both sides to kind of say, okay, fair enough, we can call this a day. We can end this war. What would it be?
This would, of course, have to be purely hypothetical because there's no way you could trust Trump. If I walked into the Oval Office and I said, Mr. President, I have a deal and I can work it if you'll just let me go to Moscow, he might say a few things and then he'd say, okay, go ahead, do it, see what you can do. If he would do that. I'm not sure he would. Because he wouldn't be at the center of it. Yeah, that's what I said. This is hypothetical. Yeah. Let's say he dispatches me. Well, the first thing I'd do after landing in Moscow is I would go see Sergei Lavrov. And I would sit down with Sergei and I would ask for a meeting with Vladimir Putin. I wouldn't force it in any way. I'd ask for it from the foreign minister. And with the foreign minister, I'd probably have an hour or two long conversation beginning on my side after the pleasantries were over with Mr. Foreign Minister, my boss, Colin Powell, trusted you infinitely. You know that. You and he talked all the time. We had a much better relationship then. I come from that world. I know I'm an emissary of the current president of the United States, but I come from that world. That's the first thing I want you to understand. The second thing I want you to understand, Mr. Foreign Minister, is that we're guilty. We're 100% guilty. You and your president were right all along. We could have stopped this war before it even got well started, and we screwed the pooch on that. We, the empire, the American empire, what you call the heinous West, did it. Mea culpa. We are guilty. I am here now representing a president who is so mercurial that I don't even know if I get an agreement with you on basic terms and go back to Washington that he won't throw me out of the Oval Office and hire somebody else. I simply don't know that. We're so duplicitous. But if you're willing to trust me for this moment in time and to begin a process that might lead to the end of this conflagration in Ukraine, then please do so. And let me see your president. Then I would go, if he said, okay, let's go see the president, he'd go with me. He's no fool. He'd go with me. And we'd sit down in front of Vladimir Putin and I'd essentially say the same thing. And I would hope that Sergei would say, this man's probably serious. And he's right. We can't trust the guy who sent him here, Donald Trump. You know that. He knows that. I know that. But I think it's worth a try. And I would propose to him that we sit down at a neutral place, not Moscow. We could go to Geneva a week later. Sergei, Vladimir, me, and I hope I could talk Donald into coming along, if not one of his emissaries, not one of the cabinet members, but someone he would appoint, like Witkoff, whom I could tell before we got on the plane, I'm in charge, dude. If you don't understand that, get off the plane. And then I go back to the president and get another emissary. then we would negotiate, truly negotiate. And I would hope that the momentum of our negotiations and the positive reports I would send back to Washington would get Trump aboard. And we'd have an end to it. And the end would be essentially what the Newsweek article that was leaked many weeks ago now that said it was the Trump position and I assume somebody in the Trump administration with a brain leaked it. All of those points are valid. And those points are pretty simple. Putin gets every damn thing that he wants except further territory in Ukraine. He gets the territory that he's occupied. Now, he has said he wants a little bit more than that. And he's fast at work right now, slower now because of the drones that have been attacking his front lines. But he's fast at work trying to consolidate those so it won't even be a negotiating point. He'll have troops on the ground there. But at any rate, we could negotiate over that. But the other points are quite clear. No NATO membership in the future ever for Ukraine. If the world freezes over tomorrow morning, that'll still be our promise. If it takes 1,000 years, that'll still be our promise. Ukraine will never be a member of NATO. Never. You know that 100-year treaty that the guy in London signed, that idiot in London, Starmer? Well, we'll sign a 1,000-year treaty. No NATO. Second, we're not even sure we want Ukraine to be a member of the EU. We'll let the EU decide that, but I'm not sure we're going to be supportive of that. And then third, we recognize your sovereignty over Crimea and your sovereignty over the territory you now occupy. We don't want a ceasefire. We don't want a peacekeeping force. We don't want anything in there. If the war starts again, we'll turn loose Ukraine and you can tear them off. I mean, that's the kind of negotiating I would do. And I would tell Zelensky, I would spit on Zelensky as I was flying over Kyiv to Moscow. And then as I was coming back from a temporary deal and supposed to show it to Zelensky, I'd spit on him again as I flew over Kyiv and go on to Washington. And I'd let Zelensky know by back channels that if he didn't get out of Ukraine and if they didn't have elections and put a new person in charge, constitutionally in charge, such as the constitution in Ukraine is, I'd take care of him myself. I'd send in a hit team. I mean, that's the kind of negotiating I do. I think in 2 months I could have a deal.
Now, what would the U.S., what would Moscow have to give for that deal? Because as you pointed out,
Moscow would have to stop. There's nothing to stop Moscow from taking Odessa, owning the entire northern rim of the Black Sea, which would be hell for the United States Navy and hell for Turkey too, because Turkey's got to, titularly speaking, the compacts and the rules are that Turkey has to bless entrance into that place. Of course, we'd force it in a heartbeat, and we'd force it against Russia too, but it'd be a much harder battle if they own the entire northern rim, including Odessa, Sevastopol, and that port to the east of Sevastopol. I forget the name of it now, but it's a major Russian port. So they'd own the whole northern rim of the Black Sea, and Putin could go ahead and take other parts of Ukraine that he might want to. I don't think he would do that, but I do think he would take Odessa. I do think he would take Odessa because that would cement their control of that body of water, which is a very strategic key body of water. And it would probably, if Putin wanted to, he could join Turkey. Erdogan might join him in this and forbid the United States ever to enter the Black Sea again with naval forces upon pain of war.
So the issue more so boils down to Russia has extensive control of the battlefield at this point. They seem to be expanding. And it seems that Ukraine is getting weaker in their capability of pushing back a Russian assault. And so the thought is, okay, well,
impossible. They can't do anything but fly drones at the Russian front lines and try to kill people with drones. They really have no manpower left. And that's the significant shortcoming of Ukraine, no manpower.
So if the U.S. engages in real diplomacy on this issue, and they get the Russia to say, okay, fair enough, we'll stop. Russia has pointed out that they don't necessarily want to freeze the conflict. And I guess from their point of view, freezing the conflict is allowing Ukraine to reload, to maybe get more manpower involved into the conflict itself. And so from their point of view, the moment that we stop, you guys are going to fill them up with bullets, guns, missiles, etc. And in the same way that Syria broke down into this kind of, we have this kind of freeze, the moment that it became inconvenient for the Syrian government, that freeze ended, in which case they were attacked. I would imagine Moscow looks at that and thinks Ukraine is going to be the exact same thing. If we allow them, if we stop, they're going to fill it.
I'm sure Putin or Lavrov would bring that up in the talks. And what I would say to that would be, there will be not a single armament, not a single dollar from the empire going to Ukraine once this deal is sealed. If our NATO allies, Germany in particular, decide that they want to continue to fund Ukraine, that's between you and Germany. That's between you and France. That's between you and Britain. But we will bring pressure to bear on them to do the same as we, not to do anything more for Ukraine. I'd make that agreement with him. And I agree with you. He doesn't want a ceasefire. He doesn't want a patrolled area. He doesn't want a demilitarized zone, anything like that. I would say that I will use the most influence that I have still with NATO and with Ukraine, and I will have presented them with a situation where they hardly can refuse to make sure that they don't resume the attack on you, and to make sure that they don't have the capacity to do that. And by the way, I think I don't have an Israel here. Now, the whole situation in Israel is different because they're our attack dog there. We don't have an attack dog in Ukraine. We have some very sometimes indecipherable people in Berlin and Paris and elsewhere. So I couldn't absolutely guarantee that some of those capitals wouldn't start something, but I could guarantee that I would work out a deal, if not withdrawal completely from NATO. And I think that would be on the table at the end of the negotiations, because what I'd want to do is convince them, genuinely convince them that I'm interested in a new security architecture, just as Putin is for Europe from the Urals westward. A new security architecture, which includes from the very get-go, not ultimately, but from the very get-go, Russia and the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which Russia is the prominent member of, just like we are of NATO. And that would guarantee, I think, in the long term, if I could work it out, that CSTO disappeared and that NATO disappeared. And that this new European security architecture, primarily led by the Europeans, to include the Russians, because they're European too, from the Urals eastward or westward anyway, that'd be the ultimate goal. Is Putin's goal a new European security architecture?
Some of the reporting is that Donald Trump at the Munich Security Conference is going to push Ukraine onto Europe. Can Europe carry that burden by themselves?
No.
This is Europe shifts Ukraine's strategy as Trump pushes it into the war. It seems that Trump has come to the conclusion we're in a multipolar world. And because we're in a multipolar world, we need to act as if we're in a multipolar world, in which case he seems to care more about, let's say, Canada, Panama, those type of things, to try to create, I guess, a supercontinent, adding in Greenland as being part of this. And I guess part of this is, okay, this is our priority. Ukraine is your priority. Deal with it. And to your point, you're saying that Europe can't carry the burden of Ukraine, meaning the moment that the United States pulls out, then this war is over.
That's true, I think. And let me say this too. Trump's Fortress America concept, if that is even Trump's concept, I can't imagine Trump mouthing any platitudes or plans that aren't fed to him, because he knows nothing about this, Trump. He knows nothing. He's ignorant. And I don't mean that in a derisive sense. I mean it in a descriptive sense. He has no knowledge of this world. So he's got to depend on all those people around him. And that makes me really worried, because look at the people around him, some of them anyway. Hegseth has no grasp of international relations, no grasp of national security, and yet he's in charge of the Defense Department, the largest not-for-profit organization on the face of the earth. But look at what Fortress America would be. Other than the United States, what would it be? It would be Canada, Mexico, Chile, Peru, Bolivia, go on down the list. Look at what the opposition, as it were, and I don't like to look at it that way, but let's look at it that way for a moment. Look at what it is. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, a host of other countries that are going to be counting their, counting the heads on the wall and saying, wow, do I want to stay in this relationship with the United States? Think Japan, think South Korea, think Australia even, think New Zealand even. Do I want to stay in this relationship with the United States when they're becoming Fortress America and I'm not anywhere near it? So you got the other side, as it were, extremely powerful, extremely wealthy, growing every day more so, particularly the center of it, China. And you got this side atrophying at best, and maybe even falling apart at worst. So Fortress America is not going to look like a fortress at all. It's going to look like a decaying empire, and an empire trying to maintain its writ when it is impossible to do so. And all the other side, as it were, has got to do is wait. It doesn't even have to put much pressure on this group that Trump is forming, Fortress America. It'll collapse of its own weaknesses. And what does China do then? Nothing, but it doesn't want this part of the world. It wants to trade with this part of the world, and therefore increase its economic prowess and might, and maybe increase its sway in terms of its currency and its economy. But China wants no war. They're the exact opposite of us. They think they're winning. They know they're winning. They want to just keep on winning, and they want to win a peace along with the victory that is economic, financial, and otherwise. Hegemonic? No. I don't think the Chinese really don't have a word except a derisive word for what we call global domination.
Right.
It's not a concept for the Chinese.
I'm curious, from your take, if you were sitting in the Defense Department today and you were looking out at the world, because I get the sense that Donald Trump he believes that, well, I can't say this. I don't know what's in his mind. I'm just going by the actions that he's taken so far up to this point.
Wow, you must have bounced all over the map.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my thought is he's looking at this stuff and he's thinking to himself, okay, America is receding to the background. The world is changing around us, and adjustments need to be made in the way that we're effectively operating around the globe. Part of that has to do with how much money was sitting in other countries, which again, it's like 1% of 1%, so it's not much. But part of it also has to do with influence and the way he's using that influence, where it's no longer our European partners, it's our vassals. And we're going to treat them as such, whether that's with the war, whether that's with NATO, because he's trying to get them to pay 5% into NATO, effectively saying, look, you need to pay more into this process, especially if you're going to try to take over the war and everything else. How would you be advising him in looking out at a world that is fundamentally changing in regards to the power centers? I mean, if you look at BRICS, for example, like as you pointed out, India, China, South Africa, Russia. Okay, this is a big conglomeration of power that is being accrued in an economic sense to confront what it considers to be America's domination with the dollar. Okay, well, how do you deal with that as a president of the United States when you see that accommodation or the accumulation of economic and what could end up being military power in order to protect the economic power? And you see Europe as a vassal state for all intents and purposes, or let's say a conglomeration of vassal states, that you may have things or interests that you want to get out of that European whatever. Because from my point of view, it seems that he's gotten to the point of saying, okay, Europe, this free ride is over. We're not going to continue to protect you in the way that we've protected you with NATO. And Europe is coming out saying, well, maybe we need to have our own European security arrangement. Is that what we're looking at? A breakdown in the relationship between America and Europe, with America looking at it as what was America first? We're going with our own priorities. Our priorities is the, as you say, Fortress America, to carve up the world. Whatever you're going to do is whatever you're going to do, you do it. Is that what we're looking at? A breakup of America and Europe as being this kind of unipolar force in the world, with America acknowledging that this is no longer a unipolar world?
Well, that's a heck of a lot that you just put on the table there.
I'm sorry.
The fundamental geopolitical, geostrategic concept for years now has been this business of he who controls Europe, the heartland, if you will, controls the globe. And that's what we've more or less operated on. We failed to recognize that for a long time, but when we did recognize it, we recognized it big time, and we built NATO to sort of deal with it. That's changed. I think I pointed this out. I've done so many interviews. I don't remember if I did it on your show or not, but The huge change that's happening in the world is that power, I'm talking about real power, geopolitical power. I'm talking about military power, economic power, educational power, financial power, economic power, intelligence power, all the elements of power they teach in the schools is shifting. It's shifting just as it shifted 350, 400 years ago from where it was centered for almost 2 millennia from the East with China as its center point to the West. It's shifting back again. It's going away from the West towards China. And it's sweeping Central Asia with it, where if you've been to Samarkand, Dushanbe, Tashkent, any of those capitals, you understand the future is there. The future is not in the West anymore. It's there. And the momentum is inexorable as that power shifts. We intuitively, I think, not Donald Trump wouldn't have a clue what I was talking about if I talked to him about it, unless I could somehow put it in New York State real estate terms. He wouldn't understand what I was talking about. Donald, the real estate is shifting. The valuable real estate is that way, not that way. You're claiming real estate that isn't Panama. You're claiming real estate that's not all that valuable. The real estate that's valuable is that way, Donald. And all the power and the things that go with power are shifting that way. Now, this isn't going to happen overnight, but it's already happened to the extent where we recognize it intuitively, if not intellectually. And that's what we're fighting. We're fighting it tooth and nail. Joe Biden, Anthony Blinken, and Jake Sullivan were warriors in this attempt to stop this shift of power. They were leading us ultimately to a war with China. No question in my mind about it. I'm not sure about Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't like war, in my view. And he certainly doesn't want a war with China, regardless of some of the tariffs and other things he's putting in place. He doesn't want a war. And I think he intuits that the Chinese don't want a war either. Xi Jinping doesn't want a war. So this inexorable power shift cannot be fought in a way that will be victorious. You can only deepen, accelerate, and make worse the power shift, and perhaps even produce the war that you want and they don't. And that's a war with China, which you are going to lose. And then you're going to go nuclear. And then the whole world's going to lose. So how do you deal with this power shift, accommodate it, and at the same time keep your own standard of living, your own economy powerful and so forth? Because the Chinese will let you do that. And India will let you do that. And those other countries that are now arming against you, not with weapons, but with financial might, will accommodate you if you just don't come at them with this idea that you want what they've got, come hell or high water, and you will sanction them or attack them to get it. That's the way they look at us. What do you do that over? Well, you do it over the two humongous challenges that we have at this moment that will eliminate us if we don't deal with them. The changing climate. How would I talk to Donald Trump about that? He thinks it's a hoax. All the people around him who are his principal advisors have told him it's a hoax. So how do you deal with Donald Trump over that? That's a conundrum there. And the second is nuclear weapons. Now, I can deal with him on nuclear weapons. He knows that we need to get Xi Jinping and Putin to sit down, and we need to get them to pull all their would-be allies in who are nuclear armed, like North Korea, us, Israel, and sit down and make a multilateral treaty mechanism that might work to control these damn weapons and to start them down again rather than up. We got a nuclear arms race going on now. So those two major challenges should be enough for us to work together, almost like a condominium of power, even though the one side is leaking power rather volatilely to the other side. But there's got to be a happy medium in there if you're going to live in a world without war and basically marked by peaceful relations. That's not what Biden, Blinken, and Sullivan wanted to do. They wanted to contest this to the very nuclear war we would have with China. And then we would all lose. Now, Trump is a different person. And I think if someone were to get to him and talk to him in these terms, I'm not sure he would accept that we're ultimately going to lose this economic battle. But that could take 1,000 years. It could take 100 years, 200 years, 300,000 years, whatever, for all this shift to take place. And then who's to say it isn't going to mellow out and maybe become an equilibrium. I call it a condominium that lives in comedy, collaboration, cooperation, and peace instead of war, sanctions, and hatred. Now, that's a pipe dream. It's a pipe dream we're working towards. I mean, after all, NATO brought years of peace to Europe. Look at how many years of peace we've had in Europe. It's falling now. It's crumbling. But we need to get something going that addresses this power shift, addresses it peacefully, diplomatically, and everyone comes out of it a winner rather than a loser.
No, that is such a good point and such a good thing to work towards. I don't see that happening in Gaza. And I want to play this clip from Trump where he's being asked point blank, this looks like ethnic cleansing. And what they mean is your plan, even under this humanitarian guise, in order to forcibly expel 1 million, 2 million people out of the Gaza region. And by the way, the West Bank also, where they want to expel those people into Jordan.
And East Jerusalem.
Right. They point out this is ethnic cleansing. This is Donald Trump's response to being pushed pointedly on this notion of ethnic cleansing.
Nobody wants to say that. They're living in hell. It's a death trap. Nobody wants to say that. They're living in hell. It's a death trap.
Mr. President, how do you know that the Palestinians don't want to leave their land? Some people say this is ethnic cleansing. You won't be able to force them to leave their land.
We're moving them to a beautiful location where they have new homes, where they can live safely, where they'll have doctors and medical and all of those things. And I think it's going to be great. Yeah, any questions? Nobody wants.
He is pushing hard on this idea that this is not ethnic cleansing. We're just moving these people to a better location. That's all. It's going to be beautiful.
This is a perfect example of what I was trying to say earlier, imperfectly, but he's ignorant, not derisive. I'm not saying that in terms of accusing him. He doesn't have the knowledge. And why doesn't he? Because he's listening to Miriam Adelson. He's listening to Elon Musk. He's listening to Pete Hegseth. He's listening to all these people. I hate to say this, Tulsi Gabbard is a rabid Zionist too.
Yes,
he's listening to all these people who are telling him a story that is patently false, but they're all telling him in coordinated effort, and he's only listening to them. So he says these things because he's ignorant. Listen to what he's saying. You're going to pick these people up and put them in a beautiful place. They do not want to be picked up and put in a beautiful place. Look at the people going through the Nazarene corridor when the Israelis allowed them to go north again. They're going through total rubble. I've got videos, a woman walking along with her cell phone taking videos. She speaks fluent English and she's talking to me on the cell phone. And she's saying, look at these people. Look at the euphoria. Look at the happiness in their eyes. They're looking at their homes, their hospitals, their mosques and everything totally destroyed, but they're back in their land. They're back in their land and they're happy. There are tears in their face, you know. They're happy because they're back. Now they're going to be slaughtered because Bibi got what he wanted from Trump. Ignorance. Trump listened to Bibi. He hates Bibi. He hates Bibi's guts, but he listened to him because the other people like Witkoff and others were telling him the same thing. They were telling him that these people like your idea. These people would love to go to someplace nice to live, even if it's Jordan or Egypt, already overrun so much that they can't feed the people they have now. That's a situation in Egypt and Jordan. So Trump doesn't know what he's talking about when he says these things. Put him down in the Nazarene corridor. Let him talk to some of these people. They would never do that. They would never put him there and let him talk to the Palestinians. He doesn't understand what's happening to the Palestinians. And most of all, he doesn't connect the dots. Every one of those now probably 500,000 dead Palestinian who are half children, half women. Every one of them is dead and buried under that rubble because of the United States of America and your predecessor, Joe Biden. That's why, because they couldn't have done it without us. Every bomb, every bullet, every artillery round, they could not have done it without us. He doesn't know that. Donald Trump does not know that his country is responsible for all of that pillage and plunder that he just he just uses as a backdrop to suggest beachfront properties would be nice for these people. They don't want your beachfront properties. They want their homeland.
But he does know different. And the reason why I say he knows different, this is Trump himself when this was years ago, meaning I'm just going to play the video. This is Trump when it's talking about Netanyahu and effectively saying Bibi doesn't want a deal.
It's a terrible personal trait. I haven't spoken to him since, right? I didn't talk to him. I thought he wanted to make a deal more than Netanyahu. And I will be honest, I had a great meeting with him, Abbas, right? I had a great meeting with him. And we spent a lot of time together, talked about many things. And it was almost like a father. I mean, he was so nice. Couldn't have been nicer. And after meeting with Bibi for 3 minutes, I looked at him and said, "You don't want to make a deal, do you?" And he said, "Well, and the fact is, I don't think Bibi ever wanted to make a deal. Why? I thought the Palestinians were impossible, that the Israelis would do anything to make peace and a deal."
So he said, I found out that wasn't true, that it wasn't the situation. Yeah.
Yeah,
he knows.
That makes my point, though. Trump is the victim of the last person to have his ear, and the victim of the last person to have his ear who gave him $100 million, and even more than that when you add it all up. So what he's listening to now is the exact opposite of what you saw there, which was rather rational. Mahmoud Abbas, although I would say, Donald, you got hoodwinked there too, because Mahmoud Abbas does not want peace either. Mahmoud Abbas wants to continue his perks and the people around him's perks. They don't want peace. They've never wanted peace. They cooperate with the IDF, with Mossad, and with others when they're oppressing their own people on the West Bank, for example, because they want to keep their perks going. They're worse than Yasser Arafat ever was. So he didn't see through them at all. He saw what Mahmoud Abbas wanted him to see. And that's Trump. He's a captive of the last person to whom he spoke, who spoke eloquently and in a way that Trump could accept. That's Trump. That's what we're dealing with as our president right now. You get him captured for a minute and he says something, that goes away instantly when he hears something else that sounds better to him, or he doesn't even compare what he heard in the past. He just takes the latest thing he hears, and that's what he acts on. That's a typical New York State real estate agent who's really a crook at heart, isn't it?
Do you think he's going to be able to do this? I mean, he has the King of Jordan sitting here with him. He is pushing and putting pressure on Egypt. The New York Times reported that Trump is threatening both, effectively saying the money that you're getting from the United States, we will stop that money, stop the resources, if you don't allow this plan that Donald Trump is trying to push through. Do you think he's going to be able to pull this off?
I do not, because let me tell you, first of all, let's take Egypt. Egypt is virtually a basket case right now, somewhat because, if not majorly because, of its population. It cannot feed its population. It cannot control its population other than with batons and rifles and bullets. It can't find space, water, and food for the population that it has right now. So you're going to dump another 1 million people on Sisi? He'll commit suicide before he'll allow that to happen. Now, the situation in Jordan is maybe not quite as bad in terms of food and space and water and provisions for life that's even beyond the pale. But at the same time, the king is perched on top of a volcano that were he to take another 1 million on top of the 6-7 million he's already got, he'd be so badly outnumbered that I doubt he could sustain his monarchy for more than 6 months, maybe a year. Maybe not at all. It might happen right away. In fact, more than likely it would happen instantly as the flood came in, so to speak. So what both of them are looking for right now, and I think Sisi found it by saying he wasn't even coming to the meeting. That was a statement from Sisi. They're looking at the possibility of activating their own forces and taking Israel on. That's one of their options, together taking them on. That
Do
would
you
be,
really wait? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you really think they do that? I mean, they have
I
stood
do
by.
if they were put in existential circumstances like Trump doesn't know he's doing this. Again, the ignorance is his deficit here. If they're put in existential circumstances where they're going to die here and their nation with them, or they have a remote chance. And look at this now. The IDF is in dire straits right now. One of the reasons Netanyahu, the only real reason he signed up to this first phase of the ceasefire, which he's going to terminate immediately. And by the way, in both the ceasefire with Lebanon and the ceasefire with Israel, the IDF has killed people every single day. Every single day. So there's been no real ceasefire, which is the usual way Israel honors a ceasefire. Not at all. And when this ends, he's going back to war. So the only thing that he wanted this 42 days or whatever for was to rest and refit an IDF that's almost broken. Hamas has really handed it its ass. Hezbollah did the same thing for a brief time before they agreed to ceasefire with Hezbollah. So the IDF is teetering right now. Its leadership is fractious, even though he's replaced it all with supposedly sycophants. Its middle leadership is very fragile, and its ranks are extremely fragile because it's been beaten. It's been beaten by Hamas, and it knows it's been beaten. And now it's going to be hurled back into that cauldron again because Netanyahu's not going to give up. He's going to kill as many Palestinians as he possibly can. He's going to start very shortly in the future doing exactly what he was doing before. So that's where we are in this. And if armies were to pour into this, and watch what would happen with Erdogan, already positioned north of the Israelis who are expanding into Syria right now, expanding beyond the Golan Heights into Syria. Damascus has no way of stopping them. They are expanding. Erdogan's watching it. Imagine what would happen if the Jordanian armored forces and the Egyptian armored forces said, to hell with it, let's go. And Erdogan said, and they might even coordinate this ahead of time, let's go too. Let's get them from all three flanks.
What would America do in that situation?
Watch, I think. What could we do, really? Now, if Hegseth were to come to Trump and the rest of his National Security Council were to come to him and say, we've got to do something because, remember, my theory is they're our attack dog. We aren't doing their wishes. They're doing our wishes. And say, it's the end of us in the Middle East, the end of us in the Levant if Israel goes down. I don't know what Trump would do, but I suspect he would say, let them go down.
You really think that Trump, who's been so obsequious to Israel and has given them effectively everything, even to the point of saying, we will ethnically cleanse Gaza. We would literally remove all of these people from Gaza.
That's not ethnic cleansing for him. That's giving them a better life on a beachfront somewhere. That's how you first characterize it.
But that's how he characterizes it. But is that really, that is a generous, because I can't say you're entirely wrong, right? Because Trump may think this is a better out. Because look, from my point of view, I look at this and I say, what if Trump is right? And again, I am one of those people, this is a genocide, this is ethnic cleansing, all of that. It's true from my point of view. But it's like, we're in this kind of weird space where it is clear as day that all of these people have been slaughtered. And okay, something has to change. And so from Trump's point of view, he looks at it, maybe you're right, he looks at it as there's nothing left there for these people to go back to. This is a wasteland. All of this territory has been destroyed. And if we can get them to somewhere else for a better outcome, okay, well, maybe that's a better outcome overall, as opposed to people staying in this particular situation with the war continuing to kind of drag on. Okay, let's say he fully believes it, that this is, from his framing, a humanitarian issue. By the same token, though, Trump has been pretty clear that, yeah, he may not want American troops to get involved in something like that. But if Egypt, Jordan, potentially even Turkey get involved and say, you know what, we're going to end this experiment, this Israeli experiment where they can just kind of expand into Syria and maintain this colony, the settler colonial state in the middle of the Middle East. This is going to end if we don't get involved. Marianne Williamson has given, what, $100 million or promised $100 million to Donald Trump. You have all of these other Israeli sources. He has put lunatics, Hegeseth, Rubio, I forget the other one's name. All of these people are lunatics that he has around him. And as you pointed out, the last person who gives him an argument is the argument that Donald Trump goes with. Why wouldn't Donald Trump be willing to fight that war?
Because he's ultimately a transactional man. He weighs the balance and he says, well, look at what it would do for him too personally. It would get rid of all this baggage. He'd get rid of all these radical Zionists around him. I don't think he's a radical Zionist. I don't think for a moment he's a radical Zionist. He's just doing what the money givers have asked him to do. And there's nothing more likely than a politician turning on a money giver when the money no longer matters in terms of reality. That is to say, the money's gone. It's already got him elected. It's already done. And you have no more fealty to that money giver because what they gave you the money for ultimately is now gone. And you're not responsible for it being gone. Bibi is. So, I mean, Trump would look at this in terms of advantages to him and advantages to those around him about whom he cares. So this gets rid of the problem. Now Jared can make a fortune because now he can go buy the territory. He can pick up the pieces afterwards. We can remake Israel, but it won't be Israel. We'll call it Jared land or something like that. This is the way Donald Trump thinks. This is the way he looks at things.
Is it possible for even America to fight a war like that against Jordan, Turkey, and Egypt?
Well, we wouldn't. I don't even think we would get into it. He would cut it loose and say it's gone, and I will come back later with the trillions that the empire still can. We print $5 trillion every 6 months that we can still print and send out there. So long as our currency remains the world's currency, we can do that. And Donald knows that. We would just revamp and revise and build it back in our image, so to speak. And Jared would get the lion's share of the profits. And MBS would get enormous profits because Donald would shake his hand and say, come in here now. We can fix this place finally.
Professor, I don't know.
I hope Donald's listening.
You may be right. I just, nothing up to this point has demonstrated a willingness for Donald Trump to back away on anything in regards to Israel. He seems to be giving them not just the political backing, but also the military backing.
But he's under the impression, fed him hook, line, and sinker by these people around him, that Israel's winning. They're not.
Fair enough. So you believe Israel, and I'll leave it on this one. You believe Israel has fundamentally overextended itself.
Yes, that's a great term. That's a great term. That's a good military term. They have overextended themselves majorly.
Wow. Professor Wilkerson, man, you are a learned speaker on these issues. I deeply appreciate you joining me. Professor Colonel Wilkerson, Lawrence Wilkerson, distinguished visiting professor of government and public policy at the College of William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. He also taught for 6 years at the University Honors Program at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He is also, and probably best known, as retired United States Army Colonel and former Chief of Staff for Colin Powell. My man, thank you for this. I really do appreciate it. You be safe today.
May Colin Powell rest in peace.
He was a good man.
If
nothing else, he was a good man.
The last good man in Washington.
I'll leave it on that. Thank you for this. Be safe. I am shocked by that interview. I have to be honest. I don't say it often. I don't know what Trump would do under those terms. Everyone that I've talked to have come with a different assessment on this issue, which is a good thing, right? Meaning, the reason why I say it's a good thing is because it means it's not an echo chamber. that people are looking at events and they're coming away with certain assessments of what would happen if X or Y took place. Colonel Wilkerson's take on this is effectively, look, regardless of what it looks like in regards to Israel's quote unquote winning, the reality of it is they weren't winning. They were overextended, and they are overextended. That's his point. That's his take. And that if Egypt, or for that matter, Jordan, is put into a position where the integrity of the state is at stake because of a push by Donald Trump to get them to accept the Palestinians into their countries, then they themselves will have no choice but to take kinetic action to prevent that reality from taking place. Now, his take is if they take kinetic action into preventing Donald Trump from allowing what Trump wants to do, what would Trump do? I don't have an answer for that. I don't have an answer for that at all. Now, his answer is Trump will not get involved militarily, that he would let it collapse. He would watch it collapse, and he would pick up the pieces after. Okay, well, that leads so many questions. What are the pieces after? What is it if it falls apart? If the militaries of these Arab countries finally take a stake in all of these people being slaughtered en masse? I guess my thing is, all of those countries sat there and watched the Palestinians get slaughtered, and they didn't do anything but complain about it. And so it's like now that Hezbollah has been decapitated, now that Iran seems to be in this kind of waiting area where they don't necessarily want to get militarily engaged. They've been, for the most part, just kind of sitting back and waiting and watching. And yeah, I don't doubt that they have been given armaments, military assistance, and everything else to Hezbollah. But Syria has collapsed. Hezbollah has, on some level, collapsed. And Iran is in a waiting space. And all of this was taking place while Israel was going on its killing spree and expanding out into Syria. So this idea that these countries now get involved, maybe. What does the U.S. do? Do we just watch? And if we don't just watch, does the U.S. have the capability of getting forces into that region that fast in order to deal and assist the Israeli military? Or for that matter, can the Israeli military keep back all of these forces that may join in if indeed one of them gets involved? I don't have an answer for this stuff. I mean, obviously, this is chaos, to put it mildly. You've had some people on the show, I think it was Mark, who said these are quislings of the United States, and regardless of what may be in their best interests, they're dependent upon the U.S. And in being dependent upon the U.S., if Trump pushes, they will jump. Now, Egypt did not show up to this meeting. Jordanian king did. What does it mean? Does it mean that Egypt has effectively said, no? No means no. And because no means no, we are not going to allow these people to come into Egypt. What does Trump do if that's the case? And is stopping the money to Egypt enough for Egypt to say, okay, we'll accept it? Up to this point, it doesn't seem like it is. Egypt has stood firm. And the fact that they didn't necessarily send or come to that meeting with the king of Jordan, on some level, they may get across their take. Our take is no. You can stop the money. Our take remains no. It is adversely, or it would adversely affect the integrity of the state itself for us to do what you want us to do. So the answer is no. That is fascinating. That is fascinating. Chaos, yes. Fascinating, nonetheless. Donald Trump has gone out on a limb, and Wilkerson may be right. I cringe at the thought. I'm stuck in this kind of weird spot of looking at this saying, all of this stuff has been destroyed. Meaning, talking about Gaza, it's been destroyed. Israel has flattened it. They've gotten what they wanted in this context of, we are going to destroy all of this. And in destroying all of this, we're going to make it inhospitable to anybody to come back to, or for that matter, to live. That's their take. That's what they've done. And so now you have all of these people who are living in this horrible environment that Israel effectively created. And then Donald Trump comes behind and says, hey man, I'm being a humanitarian. I want these people to have a decent life. and they can't have a decent life living here because Israel destroyed it. Now, he doesn't go to that second part of Israel destroyed it, but it is true. They've destroyed it all. So where do these people go? What do they do? And right now, what Hamas is effectively saying is, look, the humanitarian assistance, especially in regards to tents, has not been honored, has not been lived up to. And because it has not been honored, has not been lived up to, and then there's the question, again, right? What do you do about it? What do you do? Now, Cardinal Wilkerson's point, and other people have made this point, that the Israeli military has been chewed up in going continuously back and forth into Gaza. And it's also been pointed out, even by Blinken, before Blinken even left, that Hamas has been able to recoup their forces. Now, this is a no-duh. If you kill my mom, you have me as an enemy for life. If you kill my uncle, you have me as an enemy for life. If you kill anybody in my family, you have me as an enemy for life. And we're talking about 100,000 people being slaughtered, living, being, dying, dead, under the rubble. Obviously, when that many people have been killed, 2/3 of which are women and children, you've created enemies, right? Like this notion that you're going to kill this many people and everybody is going to be like, okay, well, fair enough. We're just going to call this a day and walk it off. There is no walking that off. And there's a question comes behind it that asks, okay, well, if you're not going to walk it off, what happens? Now what? What do you do? And is resistance really the only thing that you have at your disposal? I don't know how Trump is going to pull this off, frankly. And any attempt of trying to pull this off, I mean, for one, you need to get consent from the various governments that you're trying to get consent from. Those governments up to this point have said, no, you do not have our consent. We will not allow this to take place. And even the King of Jordan, I think, if I remember correctly, says something like, well, we will take 4,000 people who are in desperate need. Now, he said this at the meeting with Trump. Okay, 4,000 is not what Donald Trump is saying. Trump is talking about millions. Not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. He is talking about millions. And up to this point, the answer has been no. Now, the reason why I'm pointing this out is because this is not a minor item. Trump is putting his neck out on this in the same way that Joe Biden put his neck out on the issue of Ukraine. On the issue of Ukraine, Joe Biden got his neck chopped off. Is Trump also going to get his neck chopped off? He is at the zenith of his power right now in Congress and in the bill that they're going to pass in regards to the budget. They seem to actually on the way to pass a budget. And that budget seems to include the things that Donald Trump wanted in regards to no tax on tips. That's going to be one of the items that he pointed out. But not just no tax on tips, a massive, overwhelming tax cut that he wanted to effectively get through Congress. And it seems like he's going to get his legislative priorities through that budget passed. Now, again, I'm not a fan of Trump to no end. Like I've been very clear. I thought Donald Trump should have been put in a cage for not accepting the election. Meaning at the point where you realize you lost the election, dude, you got to take that loss and just walk it off. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to go with this idea of trying to forcibly keeping himself in power. I thought he was breaching law as he was trying to do that. He should have been impeached, and not just impeached, convicted, and potentially even put in a cage over it. Okay, well, the American public saw fit to put him back in office. Fair enough. One of the interesting things, though, is that the American public seems to like this idea of an active president. And the polling that has come out has shown Donald Trump to be at over 50% in regards to the support that the American public is giving him. That's amazing. That's amazing. What they seem to be responding to is Trump, not so much outcomes, but if I had to guess, it seems that what they're responding to is that he's trying to fulfill his campaign promises. Basically, the president said he was going to do X and Y. The president gets in office, and the president's trying to do X and Y. They seem to be giving him somewhat of a pass on some of the other items that they may not care all that much about. This being one of them, by the way, the Gaza issue, where the American public, when they polled, was like, we don't like him doing this. The majority, I think it was 40-something% was like, we don't like this. I think it was another percentage. When you add the two together, the overwhelming majority, we don't like this. He shouldn't be doing this. We don't think this is a good idea. Whereas you have 40% of people saying, okay, fair enough, we'll give them a pass on it, we'll let them do it. We don't care all that much about it. I'm just trying to point out that Trump is sticking his neck out on this specific issue. This is not America first. This is something else. The American public sees it's not America first. But looking at him overall, what they see is a president actually trying to accomplish the objectives that the president said he was going to do, in which case they seem to like it. Now, how long they like it and how long they're okay with it, your guess is as good as mine. But I do think Democrats need to be wary of this. They can't stand by and let Trump fall on its face. They need to articulate a plan, a strategy going forward for the American public. That is not what they've done. Hakeem Jeffries came out recently and said, what do you want me to do? What do you expect me to do? We don't have any power. We don't have any power. And to make that clear, Democrats have decided that they're pissed off. They're not pissed off at Republicans and Trump. They're pissed off at progressives who is pointing out that they need to be doing their job. Democrats are pissed that liberal groups move on and indivisible. They're pissed at these groups because these groups have been going at Democrats saying, what are you doing? Fight in some way. What are you doing? You seem to be rolling over. What I don't think these groups get is that what it means to be a Democrat is the issue. What it means to be a Democrat is the issue. If you talk to random liberals, the things that they say are pretty astonishing. They seem to be pro investigative bodies, meaning CIA, FBI. They seem to be staunch supporters of these organizations, pro regime change, even though they don't want to call it regime change. It is what it is. If you're supporting groups like USAID or, for that matter, National Endowment for Democracy, which the main supporters at this point are Democrats, they seem to be pro-war, so pro-forever wars at that. So if you're looking at what Trump was trying to do with North Korea, or for that matter, what Tulsi Gabbard was trying to do with Assad, it's like effectively saying, look, let's stop these regime change wars. Let's end many of these kind of lagging fights that we're having. We can come to terms on these issues. They are pro the Ukraine war, pro continued conflict with North Korea, pro continued or expansion of knocking over potential governments they don't particularly like. And I'm pointing out Fico's government in Slovakia, or for that matter, the Romanian government with Karl Gagescu, where they were perfectly in line with this liberal idea of we need governments to back us in our support for these wars. It is a bizarre change for the Democratic Party, who at one point used to be, we're against war, used to be pro-free speech. All of these things have fundamentally changed. It's been this kind of weird polarity shift that we are engaged in. And I guess my point is, the Democratic Party doesn't know what it is. And for the longest time, they have defined themselves as being anti-Trump. Okay, well, what does it mean when you're anti-Trump and you go into an election and you throw everything against the wall in that election? He's a racist, he's a fascist, he's a bigot, he's Hitler. These people who are supporting him are supporting Hitler. You throw all of it against the wall and you lose. Not just lose, you lose in a way where he wins the popular vote and the Electoral College. What are you after that? And is the problem that Democrats are having is that they've defined themselves as so much in opposition to Trump that the moment that you lose to the American public, where they see you lose openly with that argument, that you don't know fundamentally what you are at the end of that process. And so I think liberals and liberal groups that are chomping at the bit saying, hey, you need to fight, you need to fight, you need to fight. I think what those liberal groups are missing is that they don't know what they are to even have that fight. If you don't know what you are, if you define yourself entirely in relativistic terms with the opposition and the opposition beats you outright, what are you? Where's your weapon? What do you do? What do you represent? How do you define yourself? And how do you define yourself in the context of being in opposition to this thing that you've just lost to? It's fascinating. I get that these liberal groups are upset. They're very angry at the Democratic Party. And you should be. But, the party has issues. Mark Frost, let me bring my man in. Mark Frost is an economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Schumpeterian, recovering libertarian, and a good friend of the show. Mark, my man, how are you doing this cold wintry?
And wet here in Atlanta area, it's wet. And so it's about 40 degrees, wet, miserable. So I'm working from home mostly today. So I'm all just kind of chilling. You know? I was almost sorry that you brought me on. You were on a roll. I'm like, here, we'll just let you talk because that was awesome.
No,
that's exactly how I feel.
I mean,
it drives me crazy because I hear it all the time. Well, the left needs a Joe Rogan. The left needs this. The left. Well, they had these people. I mean, I'm a small fish, but I'm a liberal. That's the word I like for me. I'm a liberal. Government should govern liberally to the extent it can without having chaos. And I don't know what happened to the Democratic Party. I agree with you. It's as if they became psychologically demented and they could only, like one of those dolls, you pull the cord, and all they could say is Orange Man bad. At some point, voters, just people, thinkers. Okay, what is your proposal? What meaningful solution do you have to today's problems and the challenges of regular folks' lives? And from my perspective, they didn't have any.
Yeah,
and they used to. That used to be the party that was pragmatic. It seemed to me it was the Republicans that were off in the kind of in the golf course, ether, and they were the buzzkill. Now, I mean, I don't mean all Democrats at all, and I'm not even talking Democrats. I'm talking about those 10,000 people on Twitter or whatever they are. They're just annoying. They're buzzkill at parties. They're not fun.
It's bizarre.
Even the woke doesn't like themselves.
It's weird. It's very bizarre. Like Harris chummed up with Liz Cheney. He went running pillar to post all around the United States. And, you think to yourself, okay, are you really attracting Democrats when you are running around with Liz Cheney? How weird is that? And then they seem to have lapped on this thing because Donald Trump was like, well, I want to end these wars. And then so they took the perspective, well, war seems to be a good thing. And so, we hate the fact that Trump went to North Korea. We don't like the fact that Trump wants to end the Ukraine war. Like, this is a weird position for a political party to be in and to support and to back. We believe in the FBI. We believe in the CIA. We believe in USA to knocking over governments. We believe in these things. These are the things that we believe in. Yeah. And then they turn around and say, we don't understand why people don't support us. Well, because the reality of it is, as you pointed out, the Democratic Party did not used to be that way. That was not the party. And they have fundamentally become something else over the course of this 20, 30 years.
Something weird. I can't even describe it. I know there's smarter people than me that probably have tried, but I can't even describe what they are.
Well, they can't describe what they are.
They're not communists. I can respect a bona fide communist. I will disagree with them and I will debate them, but they're not idiots.
They know what they believe in.
People are just idiots. That's the only way I can describe it.
If you think back, I think it was under Donna Brazile, where they asked her, what does the Democratic Party stand for? And Brazile didn't have an answer. And Brazile said, well, Tom Perez is now head of the party. He's the guy that you should ask what the Democratic Party stand for. And you think to yourself, well, wait a minute. You were head of the DNC. How can you not answer that? Like if I ask Bernie Sanders, what do you stand for? Education, healthcare, etc. At 3 a.m. from a cold sleep, he could tell you what he believes in, what he stands for. Now, again, you can disagree with him. And you can disagree with his policy proposal and all of that stuff, but he knows who he is. They don't. And I think that is the problem that they are running into. They don't have a clear idea of what they are, what they stand for, what they represent. Right. And their value set is entirely relative to whoever they're confronted. So it's not like you have a value set that you can stand on and say, this is what we're fighting you on. This is what we believe in. And we're fighting you from this point of view and from this particular, that's not where they are. And I think their issue is that. It's just fascinating to me, like this
And then it was
change.
the gaslight, and then also, sorry to interrupt you, but
No,
but
you're
it
fine.
was the gaslighting too that just offended me. Like
Yep.
I'm one of the few people that, including Congress, that actually read the Inflation Reduction Act, just as an example. There was nothing anti-inflationary in that spending bill whatsoever. I don't know what it would be like. It would be like, I don't know what it would be. I have to think up an analogy, but it's just utterly ridiculous. And I'm thinking to myself, what happened to this party? I was going to vote Democrat in 2016, but no, can't have Tulsi. She doesn't think the right thoughts, doesn't talk to the right people. Somehow the left has become this weird thing, and they eat their own people even. Like,
by the way,
there's
Bernie
Republicans that I
Sanders.
strongly disagree with. I mean, I strongly disagree with some Republican specific policy things, but they generally, in fact, I don't think I've ever had a situation where a Republican didn't want to know me because I didn't have their same view of abortion, or I didn't have their same view of this or that. On the left, even if I agree with them on an issue, it's not enough unless I agree with all of it.
I'll give you a good example on this one. On CNN, they were having this conversation about trans kids. Now, right off the bat, that word to me is grotesque.
It is to me too.
But the guy starts screaming when somebody points out these little boys who are transitioning to girls. And he was like, they're women. And it's like, dude, they are biologically men. What's your issue? And it's like the very act of pointing that out created rage in the other person, meaning it's not enough for me to want that person to have a decent life. It's not enough for me to want that person to not deal with prejudice or anything else, meaning I want that person to have every bit as much right to live as I do.
Exactly.
That is not enough. I have to also, in my mind, believe that this biological man is a woman. And if I don't, I'm transphobic. Okay, this is outrageous. This is nonsense. And if you are trying to make that issue and you're trying to press that on the American public, I think rando person says that's outrageous. You cannot own my thoughts in this way. Right. But that is not enough. As you pointed out, you have to fully believe and sign up to all of it, or you are racist, you're a bigot, you're transphobic, you're all of this other stuff that they use as labels to throw at you. I think the American public looks at us and you people are out of your minds. Meaning, and again, that's one issue. It's not the only issue, but it is problematic. They're problematic. They just are. Mark, part of the reason I brought you on, I wanted to show you this. So voters were right about the economy. The data was wrong. Now, just to be clear, it's not that the data was wrong. It's that the people were skewing the data to make it look like the economy was better than what it was. Let's be very clear, right?
I have not read this. Interesting.
Yeah, it's not the numbers. It's the people who are looking at the numbers coming to an assessment of what those numbers mean. And so this article goes into how the American public, when they were going to the store, when they were doing their shopping, that public who pointed out, my bills are higher. The eggs are more expensive. The chicken is more expensive. The whatever I need to cover and pay is more expensive. And the Biden administration is telling me, don't believe your lying eyes. Believe us. Believe the numbers that we are putting out. And this thing is pointing out they were gaming the numbers, that they were looking at these numbers and that they were manipulating them in a way to make it look as if the economy was better than what it was. Right here, there's I'm not going to go through all points. It's a long article, but I'll go through a few of these and I want to get your take on this. So right here, the numbers have time and again suggested to many in Washington that unemployment is low, the wages are growing for the middle class, and that to a greater or lesser degree, economic growth is lifting all boats year upon year. But when traveling the country, I encountered something very different. Cities appeared increasingly seedy, regions that seemed derelict. Driving into each office each day in Washington, I noted the homeless encampments fixed outside of the Federal Reserve itself. And then I began to detect a second pattern inside and outside of Washington, D.C. alike. Democrats, on the whole, seem much more inclined to believe that the economics indicators reported. Republicans, by contrast, seem more inclined to believe that they were seeing with their own two eyes. Effectively saying, from my own take, I was seeing more homeless. The areas that I was going to, especially if you talk to somebody like Ted Rowe, who lives in New York, look seedy. Like they just look crappy. They looked like they were going downhill. It said the bottom line is for 20 years or more, including months prior to the election, voter perception was more relative or reflective of reality than the incumbent statistics. Our research revealed that the data collected by various agencies is largely accurate. Moreover, the people staffing those agencies are talented and well-intentioned, but filters used to compute the headline statistics are flawed. And he goes into unemployment and he points out, well, they're using these unemployment statistics, but they're leaving out a lot. Like, for example, if a person, I'll just read it. It said, take an egregious example. One is perhaps the most widely reported economic indicator, unemployment. Known to experts as U3, the number misleads in several ways. First, it counts as employed the millions of people who are unwillingly underemployed. That is, people who, for example, work only a few hours a week while searching for a full-time job. So if you are part-time work and you're looking for a part-time position, they would include you in the employment statistics as employed, when in reality, that's not really employment. You're just doing what you need to get by. Like, for example, they would count me as employed. And I guess technically I am. I work on a YouTube channel, but I'm looking for a radio job. And so they would say, well, yeah, you're looking for a radio job, but you're doing YouTube, so you're employed. We're considering that employment. And the point that the guy's making is that's not really employment. That's not what the person is looking for. That's not the full-time job that the person is looking for, that person would consider themselves to be employed. It doesn't even count people who just dropped out of the labor market because they can't find a job. And they go into other numbers. He says, I don't believe those who went in the past election taking pride in unemployment numbers understood that near record low unemployment figures, the figure was 4.2% in November, counted homeless people doing occasional work as employed. So if you were unemployed, if you were homeless, but got a few hours in, the guy's employed. And they were using these numbers to say the unemployment is very low. And as he goes through the entire article, they go item by item of the numbers that were effectively used that were dodgy. That the numbers were not just, the numbers that they used were gamed in a way to give a portrayal that our economy was better than what it was, and that the people were more, let's say, intact than what they actually are. A fantastic article. Give me your take on this, because you've pointed this out over and over again. One of the other numbers they went to is this idea of like how much things cost, inflation, and how they drop this notion of what people deal with in their inflation numbers. Whereas I have to buy eggs, I have to buy gas, I have to buy all of these things. These are not things that are included in the inflation.
And it's weighted by volatility. So if they say gas, we're not going to, even though low-income people pay a phenomenal percentage of their wealth on transportation costs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, they act like, so they say, well, fuel is volatile. It goes up and down. It's a commodity. We're going to weight that lower than other things. I just bought eggs yesterday. It was like $4.60 or something, I mean, and they used to be 50 cents a dozen.
Yep. Yep.
One of probably my most popular seminar that over 30 years, I've done a lot of seminars in addition to just, normal classes. Seminars are when you don't really, you don't present, you don't give tests, but it's usually a one day per week type meeting. Mm-hmm. And 3 hours credit, that kind of a thing. But it's called How to Lie with Statistics. And the purpose of it is if you know how to lie with statistics, you'll know when you're being lied to. And so, yes, and it goes back a long, long time. It just as a footnote, it's why Austrian economists, like the anarcho-capitalists, type folks, they would, if they had their way, government would never compile another statistic. It would just be banned. And their reasoning is moral hazard. They're saying we're letting the politicians create the data that is used to justify their good job.
Yeah.
It would be like if you're a salesman and you get to compute what sales were, going back even a long time, one of the major purposes, I don't want to say there was no intent to actually help people, but it wasn't that very much money at the time anyway. But the primary mover of Social Security was to make the unemployment rate lower.
Right.
And because overnight, just, it just started plummeting because by definition, people were retired and not seeking a job. And then as that evolved, you're exactly right. If you make $50 an hour and you're a master electrician or something, and then you get laid off, if you aren't being interviewed and you're not getting bites for, maybe you'll take $40 an hour, but you don't want a job at McDonald's. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You'll ride out the storm. Obviously at some point I'd work for $1 an hour if that's the best gig I could get. But the point is,
and by the way, they would say you were employed.
Yeah, exactly.
You're employed for that $2 an hour
because they like that rate to be low, so they can pat themselves on the back. And Indonesia used to do that with their money supply. They'd claim, no, we don't inflate the money supply, and yet you can just look at it, in the charts. Every currency on earth is rising relative to the rupee, and they paid the price for it. They had basically a revolution over it in 1998. Another thing that I found interesting, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I noticed that was a Political article.
Yes.
Have you been following the USAID?
I have.
They got $8 million.
Yep. I have.
And, it sort of reminds me of back with the Hunter Biden thing and the 70 some odd, FBI agents assigned to social media, or maybe it was just Twitter. I forgot the exact numbers. But I don't think government should be involved with the press. I really don't. Just from a civil liberties perspective, I think that there's nothing more important if you want to live in freedom than a relatively free press. I mean, obviously you can't slander and libel people, but
right.
but differing opinions. If you believe in liberty, you have to defend the right of people to say things you don't agree with, even if you find it repugnant. And somehow I think we've lost that a little bit. And I think part of it is the modern day Democrats. And again, you've known me a while. You know my old views on Trump. My old tweets. I did not like the guy. I didn't vote for him. I voted for Gary Johnson, actually. That's how much I hated that 2016 election. And then I had a term of Trump, and I'm like, you know what? Everything people are saying doesn't make sense. Do I agree with everything he stands for? No. But generally speaking, it was a decent 4 years. You know what I mean? And then the Democrats went after my girl Tulsi, and then they here's what I view the Democrats for the past 8 years, since the Trump era. They fought a fake war. I don't even think they believe the things that they're saying. And that's evidenced by the holy pilgrimage of Democrats and news people that went to Florida, just to kiss the ring, at the papal's, seat. And I think that the country needs parties that explore issues. And I don't want to see the Democratic Party implode, but even to Democrats. I don't know if you've watched the latest polls, even to Democrats, the polls are pretty amazing. It's like
30%.
It was like 70%, 60 something percent.
30% approve.
Yeah, of a people that just in general approve, and then 30 something percent of Democrats, actually approve of what's going on. Because most people understand, okay, do we want to kick a little baby out of the country and throw it into the river? No, of course not. But at some point, if you don't have a border, you don't have a country.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's true, but I'm hearing, I get some of my news literally from either social media or Usenet groups. It's videos that would usually be banned, if you tried to put them on YouTube or something, dealing with the wars and stuff like that, because you can get a bird's eye, ground level, understanding on things like that. And it seems to me that the entire Democratic Party has made itself superfluous. I mean, it's hard to take them serious anymore. And I would think, I'm a businessman. When I get my ass kicked, when I'm trying to win and I get my ass kicked, you know what I do? I get the team together and I get in my own head and I go, what did I do wrong? clearly the market is not responding to what I'm trying to sell.
Right.
They're doing the opposite.
That's not what I see them doing. They don't seem
I
to
don't
do
get it. I
Yeah,
do
they
not
don't
get
seem to
it
do it.
because I forgot who said. I heard it somewhere. I apologize to whoever kind of coined the term, but the Democrats have become 20%ers. They champion every 20% polling issue there is, you know, and they expect to win. And even if you don't like Trump on X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and D, and E, and F is so egregious to a lot of people, it drives them to other places.
Yeah.
I mean, the Democrats had Joe Rogan. The Democrats had Elon Musk.
They had
Democrats
Tulsi.
had people like, they had Tulsi. I mean, think of what they did. Let's just think logically. Basically, the best I can tell, they traded Musk, Rogan, Tulsi, RFK for Liz Cheney.
Yeah. Yeah. Think about it.
I mean, don't let them do draft picks in sports, you know.
We're laughing, but it's true. And they lost on a massive effing level. It's just astonishing to me.
Dick Cheney, to me, is literally Darth Vader. I mean, his view of the world is as frightening as I can imagine. I have more in common with genuine leftist intellectuals like Noam Chomsky, for instance, than I do the Dick Cheneys of the world, who seem to think that we have to rule at all costs when every inch of our history shows we suck at doing so. at nation building. I mean, we suck at empire. Philippines, basket case. Anytime we've had empire, we haven't done very well with it. And rightly, to our credit, we kind of steered away from that. And I think the neocons of the world, whether they're Democrat, Republican, or purple or green, I think they would like to see a return to the Cold War where the United States is the 800-pound gorilla that goes around and bullies everybody in the world and basically settles every dispute and all that kind of stuff. And I think Americans have grown tired of it. I know I have. I'm tired of feeling like my tax dollars go toward these endless wars that don't accomplish anything. Do you have to go to war sometimes? Yeah, probably. But do you have to solve every problem you have using military? And do you have to stick your nose in everybody's affair? It's why, I mean, we have friends like that. Everybody has a friend like that. They stick their nose in everything of everybody's.
And nobody likes it.
And they don't like it when it's nations either. So
nobody likes that. I agree with you. You and I would disagree on Trump's first presidency, but that's fair enough. That's fair enough. I would agree with you, though, that the American public likes this idea of a president that seems to be active. And I mean active in the way of, you know, I made these promises. I'm going to try to accomplish these promises, even if I have to change domestic and international order to do so. Now, the catch becomes, what is that happens in reality when the president does that? And we're seeing what that is in regards to Trump and these tariffs. He is effectively starting a tariff war all across the globe. And by the way, threatening Russia with this tariff war, because there's reporting that Trump is using a carrot and stick approach with this idea that we're going to have radical sanctions on Russia. Okay, good luck with that. That means sanctions on China, India, Brazil, South Africa, and pretty much every other country that Russia deals with in regards to commodities. Good luck with trying to pull it off. Give me your take so far on his threats to Europe, threats to Canada. You already have the car market saying that the car market is in chaos as a direct result of Donald Trump going with these sanctions idea. Many of the countries in Europe and Canada are talking about reprisals. I was looking over some of the reports, though, at the amount that we take in from Canada versus the amount that we give to Canada. And it was something like we take in, let's say like 20%, and we give like 1% to Canada. So if Canada does a reciprocal trade war, we don't really care because the amount that we're taking in from Canada dwarfs what they're taking from us. I understand what Trump is trying to do. At least I think I get what he's trying to do. But this seems to be chaos. And if you sanction the world, I get the sense that that is not something that's going to be a benefit to America. when all of the world turns around and does the same thing to us? But maybe I'm wrong. You're the economist in all of this. Give me your economic.
How much time do we have left?
We have time. You're free to explain.
First of all, can I take a minute and just talk about why most economists believe in free trade?
Please.
Okay. So if you want something to Google, Google David Ricardo, because he's the guy that basically invented this. And, you know, back in the day when British was the hegemon, the argument is that when nations trade together, they trade their best for their best. In other words, they're going to export their best because of transaction costs, you know. And if you look at it from a utility perspective, when nations trade with each other, the world becomes better off, because even though the United States may not make television sets anymore, now the opportunity cost of them going into pharmaceuticals, aerospace, that kind of thing, was they needed to stop making TV sets because you can't make everything. So we let other people in the world make TV sets, and we would buy their TV sets, and they would buy our drugs and our services, and you know, those sorts of things. And the argument is that it lifts everybody up, and that's true if you are a neoclassical economist, because in the long run that's true. The problem comes in the retort of that by John Maynard Keynes. In the long run, we're all dead. So let's take something crucial like steel. You know, it is true that if we put a tariff on steel, that's a tax on anything Americans buy that uses foreign steel. That is an absolute fact. And to the extent that steel is not price elastic, because maybe there's an oligopoly now in the world, there's only a few manufacturers of steel, and there's lots of buyers of steel. So you could have a situation where you don't even have one domestic producer of steel. And we saw this ironically in Russia. The Biden administration did everything they could short of a nuclear attack on Russia. And all it did is make Russia more self-sufficient. And so the concept of free trade is right. I agree with economists that in a perfect ideal world, if the Earth was this beautiful Star Trek, you know, Earth Dome where everybody loved each other and got along and we sang Kumbaya every day, then free trade would make sense, you know, barring intergalactic travel or something like that, because the Earth is a closed system. And to the extent we trade with each other, we develop economies of scale and comparative advantages. And that was Ricardo's whole point. Keynes's whole point was it doesn't matter if there's transaction costs, because in the long run, we're going to regret the cheap steel that we produced. We're going to regret running our farmers out of business and turning the entire farming industry into a big conglomerate, those sorts of things. So the question really becomes, is there any strategic interest by which we wish to tax our citizens so that we don't have this problem 5, 10, 15, 20 years hence? And the problem with a representative democracy is it doesn't think in long term usually. It thinks in, you know, probably at best it thinks in terms of 1 or 2 election cycles. So here's my view on Trump. So that's the backdrop. Sorry, it took me longer than a minute, but it's a complex issue.
No, I want you to explain it. You're perfectly fine. You have time. You
okay.
have time.
When I get a new client, we sign a master services contract and we have to negotiate stuff. Sometimes I have the upper hand because I know they really need what I got and there's nobody else they can go get it with at the price I'm willing to do it. And maybe they know me, I have credibility, you know, that sort of a thing. Something very important to me, because I'm not Elon Musk, is the venue of jurisdiction. Well, I'm in Georgia, so where do you think I want it to be? Georgia, you know, home turf. It's one of the major negotiations. Now, if I'm consulting for Chase Bank is incorporated in Delaware. They're going to want it in Delaware. I know I'm going to lose that because they have a whole army of attorneys, but I'm going to insist I have it, knowing I'm going to lose. I know I'm not going to get that. It's game theory. I know I'm not going to get it, but I'm acting like I want it really bad so I can give it up to get something I really do want, which is a limitation on my losses, because you don't, in the consulting world, and it doesn't just mean you go talk to people. I write a lot of software and stuff for people. So I don't want to go spend all that time doing something and then not get paid for it. So there's all kinds of, details that you have to go do. And Trump comes from that business perspective where you're constantly rattling sabers. Well, this is YouTube. We can curse. Trump talks a lot of shit. Let's just call it what it is. You know what I mean? And that's what you do when you're negotiating. You talk a lot of shit. Go buy a car and see how that works. So most of what he's doing is shit talking, and he is positioning himself for what he really wants. I don't think he wants Gaza. I'm not even sure he really wants Greenland. I think he wants to make sure that the Chinese don't have Greenland. I think he wants to make sure that our interests there are preserved, but I don't think I know for a fact he doesn't want Canada to be the 51st state, but he's saber rattling, he's trolling. I mean, I have to give the guy credit. He's a great troll. You got to give him credit for that. He knows how to troll. And the famous one was after the Harris campaign, and it became apparent they just wasted all that money and they were in debt. He did a tweet and offered, okay, we'll give you $20 million in the interest of bipartisanship. That's a troll right there. Now, it's also smart because you have a goal in mind, just like when I'm negotiating a contract, and you talk so much shit, it sounds so outrageous. Everybody gets steamrolled over because the soundbite press, mainstream media gets a hold of it. People get home from work and they watch their 10 minutes of news, and they're hearing that Trump wants to build a planned community in Gaza. He wants to, he wants to buy Greenland. All this kind of stuff. And to the extent that he is deeply emotionally invested in these things, I think is highly debatable. And I'm very confident that he's playing chess and his opponents seem to be playing checkers.
But what do you think he wants? Let's go to that. Because if indeed all of this shit talking, and look, you could be right? Like one of the things that people don't get when you're playing chess, and they often say, well, how many moves do you think ahead? And it's like, it's not really the number of moves you think ahead. Most of the times when you're playing, you are looking for small advantages with the idea that those small advantages build up to larger advantages. What do you think he ultimately wants? What is all this shit talking for? What is all of this trolling? What is all of this? We're going to take Greenland. We're going to take Canada. We're going to take the Panama Canal. What does he want in all of this?
I think what he would like to see is a United States that can defend itself, but is not a warmongering country. I think I don't know if you've ever just taken the trouble on YouTube to go back and see. There's various videos where people have done a kind of a compilation of his political views over the years. It hasn't been that different, even back when he was a Democrat. He was very critical of the Gulf War, both Gulf Wars, as an example. I think he understands that war is very destructive and that it creates institutions that are very hard to turn off once you turn them on. Mm-hmm. It's very hard to turn a wartime economy into a peacetime economy. And most countries suffer revolution, after their victories. It happens quite often. Even the British voted out Churchill right after the war was over. It was almost like people like that are people you put in a glass cage with a little hammer, and it says, break when war comes. Right. Soviet Union, World War II is a passion of mine as far as the history, the military tactics. Marshal Zhukov, or Stalin hated Zhukov, but he was a very competent field marshal. He was actually in exile during Stalin's purges. But, you know, as Russian war strategy tends to be, they suck their first year. They suck their, they just, I can't think of one war they've ever been in where they did well at first, but they're masters at attrition. They'll bleed you dry to the point where, yeah, you might have the best tanks, you might have the best planes, you might have this, you might have that, but you're going to run out of them, and you're going to run out of people to man them. And then the population that they're fighting is going to lose the will to fight. And that's kind of, you know, been where they're at. So what I think Trump would like to see is the United States continue to be a world leader without the military part of it attached to it. Now, that's the foreign policy piece. I also think he has some narcissistic tendencies. He likes to be the guy that, you know, comes in on the white horse and, you know, saves the day. But I do think he genuinely, and this has been consistent across his presidency, I do believe he is rightly critical of how the United States has become both the world's policeman and the financier of everybody's defense. It makes sense. The Marshall Plan made sense. I'm a big fan of the Marshall Plan, and for those that don't know, the Marshall Plan was the reconstruction program that rebuilt Japan, Asia, Europe. And then Europe. Yeah. And it was designed to keep them from going communist. And I'm sure there was humanitarian concerns, but it was designed to keep them in the in the non-totalitarian category to the extent that it was possible. Domestically, I think he thinks there's too much regulation, and I agree with him. Being a small business person myself, now you certainly notice what I'm not saying. I'm not saying you shouldn't have any regulation. You absolutely have to have regulation. That's the purpose of government. Literally, the purpose of government is to regulate things. But there's a trade-off between regulation and innovation. Go to any country that has exceptionally difficult institutional rigidities in terms of starting new businesses, developing new products, that sort of a thing, and you find a stagnant economy. It's not an accident that the 1800s, the 19th century in the United States was so darn productive because there was very little regulation. Now, should we also did some polluting, and that's the whole reason for having regulations. And so Trump to me is a reset. So it's going this way, and then Trump's saying, okay, we don't have to stop it going this way, but we're going to retard the momentum. The pendulum's gone a little too far. And so I think that's Trump's domestic agenda. And then there's the culture wars. Which I don't think has anything to do with race or, for that matter, sex. I think it has to do with regular people that work. And you can have regular people that work that make $100,000 a year. You can have regular people that work that make $20,000 a year. But so you have regular people that work, and then you have people that are part of the Washington, D.C. establishment, or they're part of the media establishment. And that is what offends everybody. And it's the hypocrites. It's apparently, I'm still trying to find out the answer. I know it's not legal to do it in general, but I've been told that Congress is exempted from the insider trading legislation.
They were, or at the very least they are.
And I don't know it for a fact, but I've been told by people I respect and trust that it's true.
It is true.
Trump hates that. He's talked about it.
As he should.
Because if I did that, if I have a gig as a consultant with a company that's about to do a merge or something, or if I get some information that I could go trade, I can go to jail for that. I even sign a non-disclosure saying I won't do that. And so Trump hates that. I don't care if you want to put on a dress and have me call you Jill. I literally don't care. And if you ask me halfway politely, Mark, please call me Jill, I'll go, okay. Now, if you want me to state or sign on a piece of paper or engage you personally, if as a woman, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Let's say you want to date me and you have a penis. It's a deal killer. If that's transphobic, I'm transphobic. It's not my thing.
That's a deal breaker.
And it's even annoying my gay friends. I have gay friends that have been told they're transphobic because they don't want to have sex with a woman who identifies as a man. And that's part of the culture wars. And unfortunately, that's what fires up a lot of regular people who are out working 50, 60 hours a week, getting their overtime. And they turn on the news and there's these idiots either on the mainstream media or politicians or the, I don't even know what to call it, the bureaucratic class in Washington. It's not an accident that basically swamp land in Virginia and Maryland turned out to be the most expensive real estate in the whole country because people want to live there because that's where the influence is.
Yeah.
And so I think Trump is doing his game, and what he wants is an America with a smaller federal government. I do think he has federalist tendencies. I think he thinks Georgia should be Georgia and California should be California. And even though I don't like some of those things, I kind of tend to agree with him too. It's like in Yuma. I don't know if you know where Yuma, Arizona is. I wrote a paper on it. There's a street that goes right down the middle of Yuma, Arizona. Not the middle, but it's kind of on the west side. But on one side of the street, marijuana was just a misdemeanor. Now it's legal. On the other side of the street, it's mandatory 14 years.
Wow.
If you get caught with more than an ounce. Well, because one is Arizona, one is California. Well, that's federalism. The people of Arizona have decided we don't want, people like me that like to, do stuff like that, not being outside of prison. And so they make it illegal. And so that's kind of federalism. And it goes back to the 10th Amendment. And so Trump has long stated that he thinks that the Supreme Court has interpreted the 10th Amendment out of existence. It goes back to his abortion. People incorrectly say, well, he wants to ban abortion. Well, he actually doesn't. What he believes is it's a state issue. Mm-hmm. And federalist thinking people believe that decentralization is more efficient and makes more people happier than if you have the king dictating from his throne in Washington. And people. So, for instance, and it's created a strange bedfellows, I think, of allies. I don't like, you and I disagree on some things, but we both are very skeptical and worried about the deep state. Both of us. It's created some. Tulsi, I don't think I would have liked Tulsi 10 years ago, but I sure did like her in 2000. Well, it's almost been 10 years. I don't think I would have liked Tulsi 20 years ago. But what she was saying at the time she was saying it made a lot of sense to me.
Agreed.
And I don't agree with everything she believes in.
Same here.
And so the deep state is a problem. I mean, we see it clearly now. And, I don't know about you. I can't keep up with the news anymore. I can't.
It goes so fast. Yeah,
right.
It's almost like you have to hit like specific topics. Otherwise, you're going to miss.
Yeah,
stuff.
I've completely stopped watching regular TV.
Same here.
My source of news is primarily podcasts, Usenet, but mostly just podcasts. I get more information from you than I get from CBS.
Well, thank you, Mark.
I'm serious, because you have interesting guests on. I don't always agree with them. Sometimes I'm yelling at the screen like, you idiot.
but that's a good thing.
I love that there's a forum. There's a forum
audience.
Those
it's a good thing.
Can be talked about. And it's a battle of the ideas. It's not a battle of the people.
Yeah. As I've told my audience, there will be disagreements. And
they're healthy.
It is a good thing. That's not a bad thing.
Right.
I give you a perfect example. Colonel Wilkerson was on earlier today. And if you looked at the interview between him, Mark, some of the other people, all of them disagree. All of them do. And yet, all of them are very bright. All of them know their subject matter. They just come to different assessments on what it means and what those outcomes would be. That's a positive thing. I don't want a echo chamber in that sense.
And it would be a boring world. It would be, for instance, I'm a musician.
Mm-hmm.
If every musician was the same, there would be no music. Or if there was, there would be one song and that's it, because only, people would only want to write one sort of song.
That's not the way they look at it, though. They look at it as we have a narrative and we want to maintain that particular narrative.
And I do like that about Trump's administration. It seems to me. Now, do I agree? Am I happy with all of his cabinet appointments? No. But I give the guy credit. He has picked a very eclectic cabinet.
That's an understatement.
You have people ranging from Tulsi and RFK to Rubio,
Yes. And by the way, that's the wild part. Like, if you look at Tulsi for Director of National Intelligence, RFK, these people have been very, let's say, critical of the Ukraine issue in one sense, but then you put in a Rubio or you put in a Kellogg. Okay, well, these people have been somewhat different. Now, Rubio seems to be towing the line, for better or for worse, on Trump's take on the Ukraine stuff. So regardless of his own personal take, he seemed to have at the very least taken this thing of this is no longer unipolar world.
I think Trump ran the Cheney type people out of the party, to be honest with you.
I don't know if they're out of the party.
Well, let me say they're in the closet then. How's that?
Yeah, I'll go with that. I think they've taken the closet for right now, or for that matter, jumped into the other party, which again, to me is super weird. Mark, man, I'm going to end it on this. You are fantastic. I appreciate you deeply for joining me and giving me your thoughts on this stuff. Thank you, my man. Mark Frost, he's an economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine capitalist, Schumpeterian, recovering libertarian, and a good friend of the show. You can find him at Frosty Cash on Twitter. Mark, my man, thank you. And a cat lover. And a cat lover. Have a good one, man. Be safe. Thank you, Mark.
All right, man. You have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
All right. We have come to the end. I would like to get my chats in before we close it. Mr. Ripley, he says, for free trade to work, we need to stop trading with any country that violates its workers' rights. We end up competing with those workers. And that's true. If you say, for example, we have a $15 an hour minimum wage. Let's say that. And in the context of a $15 an hour minimum wage, you have another country that says we don't have a minimum wage. We would even allow children to work if indeed we can pay them, to go into mines and pay them $2. Okay, well, if you're competing with a country that doesn't have a minimum wage, you're going to lose that competition by definition, right? Like, how do I compete if I'm paying $15 an hour and this other guy's paying $2 an hour? There has to be something else in that mix for them to say, okay, well, we're willing to pay that extra $13 because it matters more for us to pay that as opposed to getting it from this other country. Yeah, it's hard to balance that equation, right? So, look, you might be right. Americans also, though, would have to accept the fact that we're just going to have to pay more. And we're willing to pay more because we are employing American workers, or we're, the human rights are better in us paying more. I think that's something we're going to have to reconcile if Donald Trump is going to go with this tariff war against the world. We'll see how this pans out. Mr. Ripley, deeply appreciate it. Thank you for that. Laura Ald, I believe. I may be mispronouncing it. I hope I'm not. Lori, thank you. I appreciate it. Look, all of this helps the show. The show is most likely going to be demonetized, especially the morning show. So anything that you give makes the show work. And I thank you for it. Let's see. Who else? President Jafar. Mic check. Yes. Jafar, at the time, I think the mic was off. I'll cut that out when I cut these clips up. Amir Fourier. Any news on any alien news? Oh, I don't know. I have to check. I've been so preoccupied with moving and everything else. I have to check, and I will do just that. President Jafar, Bernie the betrayer, A2 Bernie the betrayer indeed. Jabari VOC Media, good morning, brother. King of Jordan has always been a shield for the empire. The thread last week makes him look like a clown. And yeah, you saw him sitting there talking to Donald Trump on something that for the most part he can't do. Or at the very least, if he did do, it may be the end of his rule of Jordan. And the same thing for Egypt, by the way. There's a reason that Egypt didn't show up to that meeting, because from their point of view, you're asking us to do what we can't do. We can't take these people in. You're talking about moving millions of people out of either the West Bank or for them out of Gaza. Okay, we can't do that. We can't accept that. And because we can't do that and can't accept that, I'm not showing up, meaning Egypt. And Jordanian king is there effectively saying, we'll take 4,000. Okay, 4,000 is not the millions that Donald Trump wants him to take. So there's that. So this is the reality to which we find ourselves. And it's going to be super interesting to see how this unfolds. Well, Colonel Wilkerson has his own take on this. His take being Donald Trump is not going to be able to do this. Mark believes that Trump will be able to do this. We'll see. Up to this point, Jordan and Egypt have effectively said, no, go kick rocks. We will see how this happens. But I'm going to end this. I want to thank all of you for joining me this morning for the show. Tomorrow is going to be another damn good show. I want to nail it down first before I out who's going to be joining me. But I want to thank all of you. I'm going to say like it, this video, share this content, subscribe to this channel. If you really dig this content, you find yourself coming back here often, please consider supporting through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, become a member, etc., etc., etc. You guys have a phenomenal day, and I will see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 94. Signing off. You guys, be safe.